The moment Thaddeus Sterling's black carriage rolled into Promise Creek, four sisters knew their past had finally caught them. Eleanor gripped her sister's hand as the man who destroyed their father stepped down, his cold smile promising vengeance. "You thought you could run," he said, voice smooth as poison. "I own everything, including you." But behind them stood four brothers who'd gambled everything on love, and they weren't about to let their mail-order brides be stolen away. Friends, this is a story of courage, deception, and how 8 strangers became one unbreakable family. I'm sharing this tale from my heart to yours. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The Montana sun hung low over the Dalton Ranch, painting the weathered barn boards gold and stretching shadows across the dusty yard. Caleb Dalton stood on the porch, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he watched the horizon, where the road disappeared into a shimmer of heat. His brothers flanked him, Luke cleaning his rifle with practiced ease, Jonah whittling a piece of pine into something delicate and young, Eli bouncing on his heels with barely contained excitement. "They should have been here by now," Eli said for the 3rd time that hour, pushing his sandy hair back from his forehead. At 22, he was the youngest of the 4 brothers, still carrying that spark of optimism that Montana hadn't beaten out of him yet. "Stagecoach runs on its own time," Luke muttered, not looking up from his weapon. At 28, he was all sharp edges and careful movements, a man who'd learned early that the world didn't hand out second chances. "Besides, what makes you think your bride's even coming, woman? Reads your letter probably turned right around." "Shut it, Luke," Jonah said quietly, his knife never pausing in its careful work. The 3rd brother, 26 and thoughtful, had a way of seeing through things others missed. We all took the same gamble. No sense pretending otherwise. Caleb remained silent, his gray eyes fixed on the road. At 32, he'd been running this ranch since their parents died 8 years back, holding it together through drought, disease, and more heartbreak than any man should carry. The advertisement for mail-order brides had been his idea, a desperate attempt to bring life back to this place that was slowly dying despite their best efforts. 4 brothers, 4 brides, Eli said, grinning despite Luke's skepticism. "It's romantic like those stories Ma used to tell." "Ma also told stories about fairy godmothers and talking wolves," Luke shot back. "How'd those work out for you?" Before Eli could retort, Caleb straightened. "Dust," he said, simply pointing to the horizon where a brown cloud was rising against the azure sky. The brothers fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts, as the cloud grew larger, accompanied by the distant rumble of wheels and hooves. They'd each written to different matrimonial agencies, each selected a bride from photographs and carefully worded letters. 4 separate women from 4 different places arriving on the same day by pure coincidence, or so they thought. The stagecoach thundered into view, rocking on its springs as it navigated the rutted road. The driver, a grizzled man named Otis, whom they all knew from town, raised his hand in greeting. But it was the luggage piled impossibly high on the roof that caught their attention far more than 4 women should need. "That's a lot of bags," Jonah observed, his knife finally still. The coach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust and creaking leather. Otis climbed down, his movements stiff from the long journey. "Dalton boys," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Got your delivery here, though. I'll say it's not quite what you might be expecting." Before any of them could ask what he meant, the coach door opened. The first to emerge was a woman who moved with the kind of grace that came from years of practice, not nature. Eleanor Vance, though the brothers didn't know her name yet, stood tall and straight, her dark hair pinned in an elaborate style that had somehow survived the journey intact. Her dress, deep blue wool, despite the heat, spoke of quality even through the dust of travel. She had eyes the color of storm clouds, and a jaw set with determination. She turned back to the coach, offering her hand. "Come on, Isabel. We're here." The second woman who emerged was Eleanor's opposite in every way except beauty. Where Eleanor was dark and serious, Isabel was flame-haired and laughing, her green dress slightly askew, her smile bright enough to challenge the Montana sun. She practically bounced from the coach, then spun in a circle, taking in the ranch with obvious delight. "Oh, Eleanor, look at the mountains. And the sky. I've never seen sky like this." "Help Rosalind, Val." Eleanor said quietly, and Isabel immediately turned back to the coach. The third sister, for, by now, it was obvious they were sisters, moved more carefully. Rosalind was delicate in a way that suggested not weakness, but rather something precious that needed protection. Her honey-colored hair caught the light, and her blue eyes were already studying the landscape with an artist's intensity. She carried a worn leather satchel clutched to her chest like it contained everything dear to her. "Thank you, Isabel," she said softly, her voice carrying a musical quality that made Jonah lean forward unconsciously. "Jenny, stop hiding," Eleanor called into the coach. "We discussed this." The youngest sister emerged last, and where her sisters carried themselves with various degrees of confidence, Jenny seemed to want to disappear entirely. Perhaps 19, with wheat blonde hair and eyes so pale blue they seemed almost silver. She pressed close to Eleanor's side the moment her feet touched ground. The four brothers stood frozen, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they'd expected. 4 women, 4 sisters. All beautiful in their own ways, all clearly together. Otis chuckled, breaking the spell. "Like I said, not quite what you were expecting. Ladies insisted they were all coming to the Dalton Ranch, showed me the letters and everything." He started unloading their luggage, an impressive collection of trunks, bags, and boxes. "I'll leave you all to sort it out. Got to get back to town before dark." "Wait," Caleb started, but Otis was already climbing back onto his seat. "Good luck, boys," the driver called, snapping the reins. "Something tells me you're going to need it." As the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving the 8 of them in awkward silence, Eleanor stepped forward. Despite the dust of travel, she managed to look regal. Her chin raised slightly as she surveyed the brothers. "I assume you are the Dalton brothers?" she said, her voice carrying a slight Boston accent that spoke of education and breeding. "I am Eleanor Vance. These are my sisters Isabel, Rosalind, and Jenny." Caleb found his voice first. "Ma'am, I think there's been some confusion. We each sent for a bride, 4 separate women from the Morrison Matrimonial Agency in Chicago, the Catholic Matrimonial Society of St. Louis, the Western Wives Bureau in Kansas City, and the Harmony Marriage Broker of Independence." Eleanor finished smoothly. "Yes, we know." Luke's hand instinctively moved to his gun belt, not to draw, but from pure nervous habit. "How could you know that—" It was Isabel who answered, her grin mischievous. "Because we wrote to all of them, of course, under different names. Very carefully selected names chosen to appeal to each of you based on your letters." You deceived us." Eli's voice cracked slightly, caught between outrage and something that might have been admiration. "We preferred to think of it as creative correspondence," Rosalind said quietly, her fingers still clutching her satchel. "We needed to stay together, you see, and you needed brides. The hell, we needed liars." Luke snarled, stepping forward, but Caleb's hand on his shoulder stopped him. Jenny spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not liars. Everything in our letters was true. We just made sure we all came to the same place." Caleb studied them, his mind working through the implications. 4 sisters, clearly educated, clearly from money based on their clothes and bearing, deliberately seeking out 4 brothers on a struggling Montana ranch. It didn't add up. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why would 4 women like you need to marry 4 ranchers in Montana, and why together?" The sisters exchanged glances, a complete conversation in a few looks. It was Eleanor who answered, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a hint of fear. "That's our business, Mr. Dalton. The question is whether you'll honor the agreement. We've traveled 2,000 miles on the promise of marriage. Will you keep your word, or are the Dalton brothers the kind of men who break promises to women?" It was a neat trap, and Caleb recognized it as such. Question their honor, make them the villains if they sent the women away. Luke recognized it too, judging by his snort of derision. "You're the ones who came here under false pretenses," Luke said. "Don't put this on us." "False pretenses?" Isabel stepped forward, her green eyes flashing. "Every word we wrote was true. I am accomplished in household management, I do play piano, and I am eager for the adventure of frontier life. The fact that I'm Isabel Vance instead of Isabel Vernon doesn't change any of that. And I am skilled in preserving and gardening," Jenny added, finding courage in her sister's defiance, "just as I wrote to Eli." My knowledge of accounting and ranch management is real, Eleanor said, looking directly at Caleb, as is my commitment to making a success of marriage. And my skills with needle and thread, my love of beauty even in harsh places, none of that was fabricated, Rosalind said softly, her eyes meeting Jonah's for the first time. The brothers stood in stunned silence. The sun was setting now, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, and the evening air carried the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. This was supposed to be simple 4 women arriving to marry 4 men, a business arrangement that might grow into something more. Instead, they were faced with a mystery wrapped in silk and deception. "We can't sort this out standing in the yard," Caleb finally said, his voice carrying the authority of the eldest. "Ladies, you must be tired from your journey. We'll bring your things inside, get you settled, and then we can discuss everything." "That's very kind," Eleanor said, inclining her head slightly. "We appreciate your hospitality." As the brothers began gathering the luggage, Eli whispered to Jonah, "Did you notice how they each defended exactly what they'd written to each of us specifically? Like they know which one wrote to who." Jonah nodded slowly, his thoughtful eyes on Rosalind as she carefully supervised the handling of one particular trunk. "They planned this down to the last detail. The question is why? What are they running from?" Inside the ranch house, which the brothers had spent the last week frantically cleaning and preparing, the sisters looked around with varying degrees of interest and concern. The main room was large but sparse, with rough-hewn furniture and a massive stone fireplace. Everything was clean but worn, functional, but lacking any touch of softness or beauty. "It has good bones," Eleanor said diplomatically. "It needs curtains," Isabel declared, "and rugs, and perhaps some pictures on the walls." "It needs a woman's touch," Rosalind corrected gently, "or 4 women's touches." Jenny had wandered to the kitchen area, running her fingers along the well-maintained stove. "This is good quality. Someone's taken care of it." "That would be Caleb," Eli said, setting down a trunk with a grunt. "He does most of the cooking, makes a decent stew, but that's about the extent of it." "Oh, we'll have to remedy that," Jenny said, then blushed, as if surprised by her own boldness. As the luggage was brought in, the sheer amount of it became even more apparent. Trunks of clothes, boxes of books, carefully wrapped items that looked suspiciously like fine china, and even what appeared to be a small pianoforte in pieces. "You brought a piano?" Luke asked incredulously. "Of course," Isabel said. "I told you I played. Did you think I was lying about that too?" "I'm starting to wonder what was true and what wasn't," Luke shot back. "Everything was true," Eleanor said firmly. "We simply omitted certain facts." "Like being sisters." "Like being sisters," she agreed. Caleb had been silent, studying them, and now he spoke. "You're running from something, or someone." The sisters went very still. It was just for a moment, but all 4 brothers caught it. Eleanor recovered first. "Everyone who comes west is running from something, Mr. Dalton. Poverty, boredom, lack of opportunity. Even you and your brothers, I'd wager, are running from something. Loneliness, perhaps. The slow death of this ranch without women to help make it a home. It was deflection, but there was truth in it too. Caleb felt it hit home, saw his brothers react to it as well. "We prepared rooms," Jonah said quietly, ever the peacemaker. 4 rooms, actually. We each gave up our spaces for our intended brides." "How thoughtful," Rosalind said, offering him a small smile that made him duck his head. "We should get you settled," Caleb said. "We can continue this discussion over supper." As the brothers showed the sisters to their rooms, small but clean spaces that had been aired and scrubbed within an inch of their lives, Eleanor lingered in the hallway with Caleb. "Mr. Dalton," she said quietly, "I know this isn't what you expected, but we are good women and we did come here to marry. The fact that we're sisters doesn't change that." "It changes everything," Caleb said bluntly. 4 strangers becoming family is one thing. 4 sisters means you have loyalty to each other first, always. It means you could decide to leave together just as easily as you arrived together. Eleanor's gray eyes were steady on his. Would that be so different from 4 strangers who might each decide to leave individually? At least this way, if we stay, we all stay. And if you go, then at least you're not left with the awkwardness of some staying and some going, she said with a slight smile. But Mr. Dalton, Caleb, we didn't come all this way to leave. We came to build something, a life, a family, a future. Pretty words, Caleb said. But you're still not telling me what you're running from. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly, just a flash of vulnerability. Everyone has secrets, Mr. Dalton. I'm sure you and your brothers have yours. Perhaps if we stay, if we build that life together, we'll trust each other enough to share them. But not tonight. Tonight we're just 4 tired women who need a meal and a bed, and 4 confused men who need to decide if they can accept a gift that came wrapped differently than expected. She moved past him toward her room, then paused. We are a gift, you know. Maybe not the one you asked for, but possibly the one you need. Supper was an awkward affair. The brothers had prepared a simple meal beef stew bread, preserved vegetables, and the 8 of them sat around the large pine table trying to navigate the strange situation they found themselves in. So, Luke said, never one to let silence stand, which one of you wrote to whom? Might as well know who was deceiving who specifically. Isabel laughed, a bright sound in the tense room. Oh, that's easy. I wrote to you, of course. Of course. Luke's eyebrows rose. Why, of course? Because you needed someone who wouldn't be intimidated by your gruffness, she said, taking a bite of stew. Your letters were all sharp edges and warnings about how hard life would be out here. You were trying to scare away anyone weak. She grinned. I don't scare easily. Luke stared at her clearly, unsure how to respond to such directness. I wrote to Eli, Jenny said softly, surprising everyone by volunteering the information. His letters were kind. He talked about wanting to build something beautiful in this harsh place, about missing music and laughter. I wanted to be part of bringing that back. Eli's ears turned red, and he focused intently on his bread. Jonah and I corresponded. Rosalind said, her voice like silk. His letters showed such thought, such care with words. He wrote about the land like it was poetry. I knew he'd understand things. What things? Jonah asked, but Rosalind just smiled mysteriously. Which leaves Eleanor and me, Caleb said, his eyes on the eldest sister. Your letters were all business. Ranch management, crop rotation, livestock breeding. I thought I was getting a partner. You are, Eleanor said simply. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? You lied about who you were. I told you my skills and my intentions. My name and my sister's don't change either of those. The meal continued with stilted conversation, the brothers trying to reconcile the women before them with the letters they'd received, the sisters trying to navigate the hostility and confusion their deception had created. Finally, as Jenny and Rosalind cleared the dishes over the brothers' protest that guests shouldn't work, Eleanor stood. Gentlemen, we need to address the elephant in the room. You're angry that we deceived you. That's fair. But consider this, we could have come here as strangers, each focused only on our individual marriages. Instead, you're getting 4 women who already work as a team, who support each other, who know how to run a household together. Watch. She nodded to her sisters. Without a word, they moved into action. Jenny and Rosalind finished clearing while Isabel began heating water for washing. Eleanor herself moved to the kitchen and within minutes had reorganized the workspace for better efficiency. They moved around each other with practiced ease, no bumping or confusion, each knowing exactly what the others would do. We've been taking care of each other for years, Eleanor said as she worked. We know how to manage a home, how to make resources stretch, how to support each other through hard times. Isn't that exactly what you need here? What we need is honesty, Luke said harshly. Isabel spun to face him, soap suds on her hands. You want honesty? Fine. We're orphans. Our parents died 5 years ago, leaving us with nothing but debt and distant relatives who wanted to separate us. We've been struggling to stay together ever since taking whatever work we could find, facing proposition after proposition from men who thought 4 young women alone were easy prey. When we saw your advertisements, 4 brothers looking for wives, we saw a chance. A real chance to stay together and have lives worth living. So yes, we deceived you about our names, but everything else, everything that matters, was true. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. The brothers exchanged glances, seeing the situation in a new light. 4 orphaned sisters, just like the 4 of them, had been orphaned, trying to stay together against a world that wanted to tear them apart. "Why the false names?" Jonah asked gently. Eleanor and her sisters exchanged those meaningful glances again. "There are people who might look for us under our real names. People we'd rather not find us." "What people?" Caleb pressed. "The kind who think they have claims on us that they don't," Eleanor said carefully. "We've done nothing wrong, nothing illegal. We simply chose to disappear rather than fight battles we couldn't win." "That's mighty vague," Luke observed. "It's all you're getting tonight," Eleanor said firmly. "We're tired, we're far from everything we've known, and we're trying to make the best of a situation that's complicated for everyone. Can we not have one night of peace before the interrogation continues?" Caleb stood slowly. "Fair enough. One night. But tomorrow we talk, really talk, about everything." "Agreed," Eleanor said. As the sisters retired to their rooms, the brothers gathered on the porch, passing around a bottle of whiskey that had been saved for celebrating their marriages. "Well," Eli said, "this isn't how I pictured tonight going." "They're running from something serious," Luke said. "You don't change your names and flee 2,000 miles for nothing." "They're scared," Jonah observed, "especially the youngest, Jenny. She jumps at shadows." "They're also exactly what they claim to be in their letters," Caleb said thoughtfully. "I watched Eleanor reorganize that kitchen in minutes, making more sense of it than I have in 8 years. And did you see how they work together?" "Like a well-oiled machine," Eli agreed. "Pa would have been impressed." "Pa would have laughed himself sick at this situation," Luke corrected. 4 brothers getting bamboozled by 4 sisters. "Were we bamboozled, though?" Jonah asked. "Or did we maybe get something better than what we asked for?" Luke snorted. "You're just saying that because yours is pretty." "They're all pretty," Eli pointed out, then blushed when his brothers looked at him. "What they are." "Pretty and lying," Luke said. "Pretty and desperate," Caleb corrected. "Whatever they're running from has them scared enough to marry strangers. That's not something women like them do lightly. Women like them. Educated, refined. They might be orphans now, but they were raised with money and culture. You can see it in how they move, how they speak. These aren't farmers' daughters or servant girls looking to better themselves. These are ladies who've fallen on hard times. And now they're here," Jonah said. "The question is, what do we do with them?" "What can we do?" Caleb asked. "Send them back to whatever they're running from, turn them out with nowhere to go." "We could," Luke said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Could you?" Eli challenged. "Could you look Jenny in the eyes and send her back to whatever has her so scared she jumps at her own shadow?" "Or Rosalind," Jonah added quietly, "who holds that satchel like it contains everything precious to her." "Or Isabel," Luke muttered, then scowled when his brothers looked at him. "What? She's got spirit. Doesn't mean I trust her." "Or Eleanor," Caleb finished, "who's trying so hard to be strong for all of them." They sat in silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch cattle horses, the distant howl of a coyote. "One day," Caleb finally said. "We give it one day. Tomorrow we work together, see how it goes. If they're going to stay, they need to understand what they're getting into. This ranch doesn't run itself." "And if they can't handle it," Luke asked. "Then we figure out how to send them somewhere safe," Caleb said. "But not back to whatever they're running from. We're not those kinds of men." "Pa would definitely be proud of that," Eli said softly. As the brothers dispersed to their makeshift beds, having given up their rooms to the women, each was lost in thought about the strange turn their lives had taken. In her room, Eleanor sat brushing her hair, listening to the quiet movements of her sisters settling in. They'd made it this far, but tomorrow would be crucial. She'd seen something in Caleb Dalton's eyes, suspicion, yes, but also a grudging respect. If they could prove themselves useful, if they could show these men that they were assets rather than burdens, they might have a chance. In the room next door, Isabel was unpacking with her usual energy, humming softly to herself. Luke Dalton was exactly as she'd pictured from his letters, gruff, suspicious, defensive. But she'd seen the way he'd watched her during dinner, the conflict in his eyes. She could work with that. Rosalind sat by her window, sketching the view by moonlight. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, like something out of the romantic novels she used to read. And Jonah? He had gentle hands and thoughtful eyes. Maybe this desperate gamble would turn into something good after all. Jenny curled up in her bed, the quilts pulled up to her chin despite the warmth. She was the most frightened of the four, the one who'd argued against this plan. But Eli seemed truly kind, and the way he defended her to his brothers, maybe she could be safe here. Maybe they all could. As the moon rose over the Montana mountains, the Dalton Ranch held 8 souls, all wondering what dawn would bring. None of them could have imagined that within weeks their lives would be threatened by a danger none of them saw coming, and that the bonds they were just beginning to forge would be tested by fire greed and the long reach of a vengeful man named Thaddeus Sterling. But that first night they simply slept exhausted by travel and emotion while the vast Montana sky wheeled overhead, indifferent to human plans and deceptions. Morning came too soon, announced by the crow of a rooster and the lowing of cattle that needed tending. The brothers were up before dawn, their bodies accustomed to the rhythm of ranch life. They moved quietly, trying not to wake their guests, but they needn't have bothered. Eleanor was already in the kitchen when Caleb entered, a fire crackling in the stove and coffee brewing. She'd changed from her traveling clothes into a simple cotton dress and apron, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Good morning," she said, not looking up from where she was slicing bacon. "I hope you don't mind. I'm an early riser, and I thought you'd need breakfast before starting your work." Thank you," Caleb said, thrown off balance. He'd expected to have to wake them to find them complaining about the early hour. "Your stores are well organized but low," Eleanor continued, cracking eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. "I made a list of what you'll need from town. I can stretch what you have for about 2 weeks, maybe 3, if we're careful. But after that, you made a list." Caleb moved closer, saw the neat handwriting on a piece of paper. It was incredibly detailed with quantities and even estimated prices. "I ran a household for 5 years on very limited resources," Eleanor said. "I know how to make do. But you'll need supplies for winter and soon. Some of these preserves in your cellar are already turning." Before Caleb could respond, Isabel burst into the kitchen, her hair still wild from sleep, but her energy undimmed. "Eleanor, you promised to wake me." "Oh, good morning, Mr. Dalton. Luke, Jonah." The other brothers had entered, drawn by the smell of cooking food. "Where's Eli?" "Checking on the horses," Jonah said, his eyes finding Rosalind as she entered more sedately, already dressed and put together. "I'll help with breakfast," Rosalind said, moving to Eleanor's side. "Jenny?" Eleanor asked. "Coming. She's just nervous." Indeed, Jenny appeared a moment later, dressed but pale, her eyes darting around the room like she expected danger to jump out at any moment. "Come help me with the biscuits," Eleanor said gently, and Jenny immediately moved to her sister's side, seeming to calm in the familiar routine. The brothers watched in fascination as the 4 sisters transformed their kitchen into a hub of efficient activity. Within 30 minutes, a breakfast unlike anything they'd had in years was on the table. Fluffy biscuits, crispy bacon, eggs, cooked perfectly fried potatoes, and even a pot of preserves that Jenny had somehow improved with a touch of cinnamon. "This is..." Eli, who'd joined them, seemed at a loss for words. "This is incredible," Jenny blushed prettily. "It's just breakfast." "It's the best breakfast we've had since Ma died," Jonah said quietly, and the honesty in his voice made them all pause. "Well," Isabel said, breaking the moment of tension, "if you think this is good, wait until you see what Jenny can do with a full pantry and a day to prepare." "Isabel," Jenny protested, but there was a pleased smile on her face. As they ate, Caleb outlined the day's work. "We need to check the fence lines in the north pasture, move the cattle to better grazing muck out the stables, and start preparing the fields for winter crops. It's hard work." "We're not afraid of hard work," Eleanor said. "How can we help, Luke laughed, but it wasn't entirely unkind. "Ladies like you don't muck stables." "Ladies like us do whatever needs doing," Isabel shot back. "Or would you prefer we sit around fanning ourselves while you do everything?" "I can help with the chickens and the kitchen garden," Jenny offered. "I saw you have one, but it needs attention." "I can work on mending," Rosalind said. I noticed several shirts and pants that need repair. And those curtains in the main room are beyond help. I could make new ones if you have fabric. We don't have fabric, Luke said. Then I'll make do with what we have. There are some old sheets in the linen closet that could be repurposed. You went through our linen closet. Luke's voice was sharp. I was looking for where to put our things, Rosalind said calmly. I wasn't snooping, just trying to understand the house. I can help with the books, Eleanor said to Caleb. I saw the ledgers on your desk. They're a bit chaotic. Caleb felt heat rise in his face. I manage fine. I'm sure you do, but I could help you manage better. I have experience with accounting. From your rich father? Luke asked sarcastically. Eleanor's face went carefully blank. From managing a household with no money and 4 mouths to feed, you learn to track every penny when pennies are all you have. The bitterness in her voice was real, and it silenced Luke's next retort. After breakfast, they scattered to their various tasks. Caleb found himself watching Eleanor as she attacked the ledgers with a determined efficiency that was almost frightening. Within an hour, she'd identified 3 errors in his calculations that had cost them money and found a pattern in their expenses that suggested someone in town might be overcharging them. You're sure about this, he asked, looking at her neat columns of figures. Mathematics doesn't lie, Eleanor said. Unlike people, numbers are always honest. Is that a confession? She looked up at him, those storm gray eyes direct. It's an observation. We did what we had to do to stay together and stay safe. I won't apologize for that, but I will promise you this from this moment forward. I'll be honest with you, as honest as I can be. As honest as you can be. There are things that aren't just my secrets to tell, she said carefully. My sister's stories are their own, but about the ranch, the work, my intentions here, complete honesty. Outside, Luke was discovering that Isabel's spirit extended to physical labor. She'd insisted on helping with the fence repair, and while she clearly had no experience with the work, she attacked it with an enthusiasm that was both amusing and admirable. You're holding the hammer wrong, he said for the 3rd time. Then show me again. She said, no frustration in her voice, only determination. He moved behind her, adjusting her grip, and became suddenly aware of how small she was, how the red of her hair caught the sunlight like fire. She smelled like soap and something floral completely out of place in the dusty field. Like this, she asked, and he realized he'd been standing there too long. Yeah, like that. He stepped back quickly. Why are you really here? She turned to face him, dirt already smudging her cheek. Because being here, even if it's hard, even if you don't trust us, is better than where we were. That bad. You have no idea. For a moment, her bright demeanor cracked, and he saw fear underneath. Real fear. Then she smiled again, brilliant and false. But that's behind us now. We're here, and we're staying Luke Dalton, whether you like it or not. In the garden, Jenny was working alongside Eli, her gentle hands coaxing life from plants that had been neglected for too long. She'd relaxed slightly, though she still startled when he moved too quickly. These tomatoes might still produce if we're lucky, she said carefully, pruning dead leaves. And the squash is salvageable, but you'll need to plant winter vegetables soon. I tried, Eli admitted, but nothing seems to grow right for me. You're planting too deep, Fum, she said, then blushed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't criticize. No, please, tell me. Ma had a garden that fed us all year round, but I can't seem to make anything grow like she did. Jenny smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. I can teach you, if you'd like. I'd like that very much. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Eli gathered the courage to ask, What are you running from Jenny? Her hands stilled. Someone who thinks he owns us. Someone who won't accept that we have the right to choose our own lives. A husband. No. The vehemence of her response surprised them both. No, none of us were married, but there are other ways men try to own women, Mr. Dalton. Eli, please call me Eli. She looked at him, those silver blue eyes studying his face. Eli, then. And you should call me Jenny. Meanwhile, Jonah had found himself drawn to where Rosalind worked, transforming their worn clothing and linens into something presentable. Her fingers moved with an artist's precision, and he noticed she was humming softly as she worked. "What's that song?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "Oh, I didn't realize it's just something our mother used to sing. I'm sorry if it bothered you." "It didn't. It's nice, peaceful." He gestured to the shirt she was mending. "That's my good shirt. Or was." "It will be again. The fabric is quality. It just needs care." She held it up, showing where she'd already repaired one tear so expertly it was invisible. Things that are worth having are worth maintaining. Is that philosophy or practicality? Both. She smiled, and he was struck by how it transformed her delicate features. "I found they often go hand in hand." He sat down across from her, pulling out his whittling knife and a piece of wood. They worked in silence, but it was comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years. "It's a horse," she said, suddenly looking at his carving. "It's supposed to be, for Jenny. She seems to like them, and I thought it might make her feel more at home." Rosalind's eyes softened. "That's very kind of you. She's had a difficult time, more than the rest of us in some ways." "Someone hurt her." It wasn't a question. "Someone tried to." Eleanor stopped him, but Jenny's never quite recovered from the fear. "Eleanor protected her. Eleanor protects all of us. It's what she does." Rosalind's needle paused. "It's why we did the deception. She knew we couldn't all find marriages in the same place any other way, and she won't let us be separated." "You could have told the truth." "Could we? Would you have agreed to take all four of us sight unseen? Would you have believed we were genuine in our intentions and not just looking for a free ride to California or somewhere else?" Jonah considered this. "Probably not," he admitted. "Eleanor did what she had to do. She always does." There was deep love in Rosalind's voice, but also something else, worry perhaps. "I just hope the cost isn't too high this time." As the sun reached its zenith, the 8 of them gathered for lunch. The sisters had somehow produced a meal from the meager supplies: soup and fresh bread with preserved fruit for dessert. The brothers ate like they hadn't seen food in weeks. "This is witchcraft," Luke declared, his third bowl of soup in hand. "It's economy," Eleanor corrected, "and Jenny's skill with seasonings." "Whatever it is, it's a miracle," Caleb said. He looked around the table at the strange gathering, his brothers, more relaxed than he'd seen them in months, and these 4 women who'd disrupted everything and somehow made it better. "We need to go to town tomorrow, for supplies." "All of us?" Isabel asked eagerly. "No," Eleanor said quickly, too quickly. "There's no need for all of us to go." The brothers exchanged glances. "You're worried about being seen," Caleb said. "It wasn't a question." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "We're worried about being found. There's a difference." "By this man who thinks he owns you?" "Yes." "What's his name?" Luke demanded. "If we're harboring fugitives, we should at least know who might come calling." The sisters all looked to Eleanor, who set down her spoon carefully. "His name is Thaddeus Sterling. He's a wealthy man from Boston who acquired certain debts of our father's after his death. He believes those debts give him claim to us." "Debts don't work that way," Jonah said. "They do when you have enough money and power to make the law say whatever you want," Isabel said bitterly. "He wanted to marry one of you?" Eli asked. Jenny shuddered visibly. "He wanted all of us, not as wives, as entertainment for him and his friends." The silence that followed was deafening. The brothers' faces darkened with understanding and anger. "Over my dead body," Luke said quietly, and there was something dangerous in his voice that made Isabel look at him in surprise. "That's what we were afraid of," Eleanor said. "Dead bodies. Ours or anyone who tried to help us. Sterling has money influence and a complete lack of conscience. We ran because fighting him would have been futile." "So you came here," Caleb said, "to the middle of nowhere, Montana, to marry strangers." "To marry men who needed wives and wouldn't ask too many questions," Eleanor corrected. "Men who from their letters seemed decent and honorable. Men who might give us a chance at real lives." "And if he finds you, then we deal with that when it happens," Eleanor said. but her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. If, Rosalind said softly. Not when, if. We've been careful. The trail should be cold by now. But even as she said it, none of them looked convinced. And 2,000 miles away in a luxurious Boston office, Thaddeus Sterling was reading a report from a Pinkerton detective about 4 sisters who'd vanished without a trace, and his cold smile promised that he would never stop looking. The game had only just begun. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised everyone with its natural ease. The Montana autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and rust, and the Dalton Ranch began to transform under 8 pairs of hands working toward a common purpose, though the shadow of Thaddeus Sterling lingered in every careful glance the sisters cast toward the road. Eleanor had taken control of the household accounts with a precision that both impressed and slightly terrified Caleb. She'd discovered that the general store owner in town, Mr. Garrison, had been padding their bills for years, counting on the brothers' inattention to detail. When she presented her findings one evening, spread across the kitchen table in neat columns, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "He's been stealing from you," she said bluntly, her finger tracing down the ledger. "Small amounts, but consistent. Over 5 years, it adds up to nearly $300. $300? Luke slammed his fist on the table. "That son of a—" Luke, Isabel interrupted, placing a gentle hand on his arm. The gesture was becoming familiar, her ability to calm his temper with a touch. "Let Eleanor finish." Eleanor looked between them, noting the interaction with interest before continuing. "I suggest we confront him, but carefully. We need his store, and there isn't another for 50 miles. But if we make it clear we're watching now, he'll stop." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You and I?" Eleanor clarified. "A united front. The new wife checking the books would explain the sudden discovery without making it seem like you've been foolish all these years." "But you're not my wife," Caleb pointed out, though something in him twisted at the words. "Not yet," Eleanor said quietly, and the room went still. It was the first time any of them had directly addressed the elephant in the room, the original purpose of the sisters' arrival. For weeks they'd been dancing around it, working together, growing comfortable with each other's presence, but avoiding the question of marriage. Is that still what you want?" Caleb asked, his voice rougher than intended. Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "We came here to marry. That hasn't changed. The question is whether you and your brothers still want brides who arrived under unusual circumstances." Before anyone could answer, the sound of horses approaching fast made them all freeze. The sisters' faces went pale, and Jenny actually whimpered, pressing closer to where Eli sat. Luke was already reaching for his rifle when Jonah looked out the window. "It's Sheriff Watson, and he's not alone." The sheriff was a decent man, if somewhat ineffectual, who mostly concerned himself with keeping the peace in town rather than ranging out to the homesteads. His presence here, especially with the well-dressed stranger beside him, sent alarm bells ringing. "Stay inside," Caleb ordered the women, but Eleanor was already shaking her head. "If it's Sterling's man hiding, won't help. We need to know what we're facing." They filed out onto the porch, the brothers instinctively positioning themselves in front of the sisters. Sheriff Watson tipped his hat, looking uncomfortable. The man beside him was everything the sheriff wasn't, polished confident, with the kind of expensive clothes that had no business in Montana ranch country. "Caleb boys, sus," the sheriff said. "This here's Mr. Harrison. He's a Pinkerton detective from back east, looking for some missing women." Harrison's eyes were already scanning the sisters, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. "The Vance sisters, I presume. Mr. Sterling has been quite worried about you." "We don't know any Sterling," Eleanor said coolly, stepping forward despite Caleb's attempt to keep her back. "I'm Eleanor Dalton. These are my sisters-in-law." "Dalton." Harrison's eyebrows rose. "How convenient. And I suppose you have marriage certificates to prove these relationships? Do we need them?" Luke asked, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Man's wife is his business, not yours." "It is when those women are thieves," Harrison said smoothly, producing a paper from his coat. "Mr. Sterling has sworn out a complaint. These women stole valuable jewelry from his household before disappearing. I have a warrant for their arrest." "That's a lie," Isabel burst out. "We never stole anything." The jewelry in question belonged to your late mother, did it not? Harrison's smile was cold. Mr. Sterling acquired it along with your father's other assets when he purchased the debts. Therefore, when you took it, our mother's jewelry was never part of father's business assets, Eleanor said, her voice like ice. It was willed to us specifically before his debts accumulated. Do you have proof of that? Eleanor's silence was answer enough. I thought not. Mr. Sterling is willing to be lenient, however. Return with me voluntarily along with the stolen items, and he'll consider the matter closed. Like hell, Luke growled, and now his gun was halfway out of its holster. Sheriff Watson shifted nervously. Now, Luke, let's not have any trouble. If these ladies have committed a crime, the only crime here is harassment, Caleb said, stepping forward. His voice carried the quiet authority that had kept the ranch running through countless crises. These women are under our protection. If this Sterling wants to pursue some claim, he can do it through proper channels, not by sending hired thugs to intimidate them. Harrison's eyes narrowed. I'd be careful, Mr. Dalton. Harboring fugitives is a serious offense. So is trespassing, Jonas said mildly, but he'd moved to flank Luke, his own hand near his weapon. And unless that warrant has been validated by a Montana judge, it's just paper out here. The Pinkerton's composure cracked slightly. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not unified resistance, from 4 well-armed men who looked like they knew how to use those arms. Sheriff Watson cleared his throat. Maybe we should all calm down. Mr. Harrison, these are respectable folks. The Dalton boys have been here since they were kids. If they say these women are their wives without documentation, without witnesses, without any proof except their word, Harrison interrupted. My word's always been good enough for me, the sheriff said, and there was a slight edge to his voice now. He might be ineffectual, but he didn't like outsiders coming in and implying his neighbors were liars. Harrison saw he was losing ground. I'll be staying in town, Sheriff. At the hotel. I trust you'll look into this matter more thoroughly. Mr. Sterling is a powerful man with powerful friends. It would be unfortunate if Montana gained a reputation for harboring criminals. I'll look into it, Watson said noncommittally. Come on, Mr. Harrison. I'll escort you back to town. As they mounted up, Harrison looked back at the sisters. This isn't over. Mr. Sterling doesn't give up what's his. We're not his, Jenny said, surprising everyone with the strength in her usually timid voice. We never were, and we never will be. Harrison's smile was unpleasant. We'll see about that, Miss Vance, or should I say Mrs. Dalton. After they rode away, the 8 of them stood in tense silence on the porch. Finally, Isabel let out a shaky laugh. Well, that was exciting. That was dangerous, Eleanor corrected, but her own hands were trembling. He'll be back. With more legal pressure, maybe more men. Let him come, Luke said flatly. This is our land. We defend what's ours. But we're not yours, Rosalind pointed out softly. Not really. We're just house guests who've overstayed their welcome. No, Eli said firmly, surprising them with his vehemence. You're not house guests. You're... What are we... Jenny asked, looking at him with those silver blue eyes that seemed to see straight through him. The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that would change everything. Caleb looked at his brothers, saw the same resolution in their faces that he felt in his heart. They'd started this arrangement as a business deal, 4 lonely men seeking companionship and help. But over the past weeks it had become something more. Eleanor's quiet strength, Isabel's infectious joy, Rosalind's gentle creativity, Jenny's sweet determination. They'd woven themselves into the fabric of the ranch of the brothers' lives in ways none of them had expected. You're ours, Caleb said simply. If you want to be. We'll marry you proper and legal tomorrow if need be. That'll stop any claim this Sterling thinks he has. You'd marry us just to protect us, Eleanor asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that Caleb had never heard before. No, he said, stepping closer to her. I'd marry you because this ranch hasn't felt like home in 8 years, and somehow, in just a few weeks, you've changed that. I'd marry you because you're brilliant and brave, and you make me want to be better than I am. Caleb, Eleanor breathed her eyes wide. I'd marry Isabel because she makes me laugh Luke said gruffly, not looking at the red-haired sister who gasped softly at his words. Because she's not afraid of my temper, and she makes even the hard days seem brighter. I'd marry Rosalind because she sees beauty where others see only harshness, Jonah added quietly. Because her quiet presence brings peace I didn't know I was missing. And I'd marry Jenny because she's teaching me to nurture things instead of just surviving. Eli finished reaching out to take Jenny's trembling hand. Because her gentleness makes me want to be gentle too. The sisters stood, frozen tears streaming down more than one face. You don't have to do this, Eleanor whispered. We've brought danger to your door. You've brought life to our door, Caleb corrected. The danger we can handle. The emptiness we were living in, that was killing us slowly. But Sterling is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight I'm asking you a question. Eleanor Vance, will you marry me? Really marry me, not as some business arrangement or protective measure, but as my wife, my partner, my future. Eleanor looked at her sisters, saw the hope in their faces, the way Isabel was already reaching for Luke's hand, how Rosalind had moved closer to Jonah, how Jenny was gazing at Eli like he'd hung the moon. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I'll marry you, Caleb Dalton. The night exploded into chaos, happy chaos with embraces and tears, and Isabel actually jumping into Luke's arms, causing him to stumble backward with a surprised laugh. Plans were made quickly. They'd ride to town tomorrow, find the circuit preacher who was thankfully in residence this week, and make it legal before Harrison could mount any real legal challenge. But as they celebrated, none of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above the ranch, taking notes in a small book before mounting his horse and riding back toward town. The next morning dawned bright and clear with that crystalline quality that Montana sky got in autumn. The sisters emerged from their rooms in their best dresses, not wedding finery, but the nicest things they'd managed to bring. Eleanor wore deep blue Isabel in green that matched her eyes, Rosalind in soft lavender, and Jenny in cream with tiny flowers embroidered at the hem. You're beautiful, Caleb said softly when he saw Eleanor, and she blushed like a young girl. You clean up pretty well yourself, she replied, taking in his freshly shaved face and the suit that had probably been his father's altered to fit him. They decided to take the wagon, all 8 of them together, a united front against whatever awaited them in town. Luke drove while Caleb rode alongside on horseback, keeping watch. The sisters sat in the back holding hands, their faces mixing joy and apprehension. What if the preacher won't marry us? Jenny asked nervously. Reverend Mills is a good man, Eli assured her from where he sat across from her. He's known us since we were boys. He'll do right by us. The town of Promise Creek wasn't much a main street with a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and a few other buildings, but today it seemed to buzz with unusual activity. People stopped to stare as the Dalton wagon rolled in whispers following in their wake. Word's gotten out, Jonah observed. Let them talk, Isabel said defiantly. We've done nothing wrong. But as they pulled up to the church, they found Harrison standing on the steps, Sheriff Watson beside him looking deeply uncomfortable. Going somewhere? Harrison asked pleasantly. Church, Luke said flatly. It's a free country. Indeed it is, which is why I've taken the liberty of speaking with Reverend Mills about the inadvisability of performing any marriages that might be considered fraudulent. Eleanor's heart sank, but before anyone could respond, the church door opened and Reverend Mills himself emerged. He was an older man, thin and weathered with kind eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be easily swayed. Mr. Harrison, he said mildly, I believe I told you that I'd make my own decisions about who I marry in my church. And I believe I explained the legal ramifications. You explained a lot of things, the Reverend interrupted. But what I see here are 4 young couples who want to be married. Unless you have some legal impediment, and I mean real legal impediment, not some paper from back east that may or may not be legitimate, then I'll perform my duty as I see fit. Reverend, Eleanor stepped forward. We need to be honest with you. We did come here under unusual circumstances, but our feelings, our intentions, they're real. Mills studied her for a long moment, then looked at each couple in turn. Caleb Dalton, do you want to marry this woman? More than anything, Caleb said without hesitation. And you, Miss Vance, Eleanor Vance, and yes, I want to marry him. The Reverend nodded. Then let's go inside, Mr. Harrison. You're welcome to witness if you'd like. Sheriff, you too. Always good to have legal witnesses to a marriage. Harrison's face darkened. This isn't over. Mr. Sterling has resources you can't imagine. And these folks have something Mr. Sterling doesn't, Reverend Mills said. What's that? Friends, community, the protection of decent people who don't take kindly to rich men thinking they can buy and sell everything, including human beings. Indeed, as they entered the church, they found it surprisingly full. Word had spread, and the townspeople had gathered, some out of curiosity, but many out of support for the Dalton boys who'd been part of this community their whole lives. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, actually had flowers, late-blooming wildflowers she'd gathered that morning. Every bride needs a bouquet, she said firmly, pressing them into the sisters' hands. Old Sam from the livery stable had brought his fiddle. Can't have a wedding without music, he declared. Even Mr. Garrison from the general store was there, looking sheepish. He approached Caleb quietly. I heard what Eleanor discovered about the bills. I'm sorry, Caleb. Times have been hard, but that's no excuse. I'll make it right. Caleb looked at Eleanor, who gave a small nod. We'll work it out, Garrison, after the wedding. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Reverend Mills spoke about love being patient and kind, about two becoming one, about the sacred nature of the vows they were taking. When he asked if anyone had any objections, everyone turned to look at Harrison, who stood in the back, his face like thunder, but his mouth closed. Then by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husbands and wives. The church erupted in celebration as four couples kissed Caleb and Eleanor with tender reverence. Luke and Isabel with passionate enthusiasm, Jonah and Rosalind with gentle sweetness, and Eli and Jenny with shy delight. But the celebration was short-lived. As they exited the church, Harrison was waiting with a telegram in his hand and a satisfied smirk on his face. Congratulations on your nuptials, he said mockingly. Mr. Sterling will be so pleased to hear about them. In fact, he's so pleased that he's decided to come to Montana himself to offer his personal congratulations. Eleanor went white. He's coming here. He'll arrive within the week, and he's bringing a federal marshal with him. You see, he's recently discovered that some valuable government bonds were among the items stolen from his safe. That makes this a federal crime. Harrison's smile was vicious. Marriage won't protect you from federal charges, Mrs. Dalton. We didn't take any bonds, Isabel protested. We only took what was ours. Prove it, Harrison said simply. In the meantime, I'd suggest you enjoy your honeymoon. It might be shorter than you think. As he walked away, the four couples stood frozen on the church steps, their joy shattered by the specter of Thaddeus Sterling's imminent arrival. We should run, Jenny whispered, pressing against Eli. We should leave tonight. No, Eleanor said firmly. We're done running. This is our home now, our life. If Sterling wants a fight, we'll give him one. Eleanor's right, Caleb said, putting his arm around his new wife. This is our land, our town. Sterling might have money and influence back east, but out here, we have something more valuable. What's that? Rosalind asked. Luke grinned, fierce and protective. Family. And in Montana, family stands together. That evening, back at the ranch, the newlyweds gathered in the main room to plan. The wedding night they should have been celebrating was instead spent strategizing for the battle to come. We need those documents, Eleanor said. Mother's will specifically. It proves the jewelry was ours before Father's debts. Where would they be? Caleb asked. In Boston. In Father's old office, which Sterling now owns. Eleanor's frustration was evident. Impossible to get. Not impossible, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone spun to find a stranger standing there, a young man well-dressed but travel-worn with familiar gray eyes. Thomas? Eleanor gasped. Thomas, is that you? The young man smiled. Hello, Eleanor. Girls, I've been looking for you for months. Who the hell are you? Luke demanded, his hand on his gun. Thomas Vance, the stranger said. Their cousin, and possibly the answer to your Sterling problem. Eleanor was across the room in seconds, embracing the young man fiercely. "We thought Sterling said you were dead." "He thought I was. I was supposed to be on a ship that sank, but I missed the sailing. When I got back to Boston and found you gone and Sterling claiming ownership of everything I knew, something was wrong." Thomas pulled a leather portfolio from his coat. "So I did some investigating, and I found these." He opened the portfolio, revealing documents that made Eleanor gasp. Mother's will. Father's real books, not the forged ones Sterling presented. And something else, correspondence between Sterling and a certain judge about arranging the debt transfer. Thomas smiled grimly. "Enough to prove Sterling's claims are fraudulent and possibly enough to have him arrested for fraud and conspiracy." "How did you get these?" Rosalind asked in wonder. "I broke into Sterling's office. Figured I was already supposed to be dead, might as well take the risk." He looked around at the brothers. "I assume these are the men you wrote about in your letter to Aunt Catherine." "You found the letter?" Isabel asked. "Eventually. Took some doing, but yes. When I read that you'd gone west to marry, I knew I had to find you, to bring you these, and to warn you Sterling's more dangerous than you know. The man he's bringing isn't just a federal marshal. Marshal Brennan is Sterling's cousin, and he's as corrupt as they come." "So even with these documents," Jonah began. "It might not be enough," Thomas confirmed. "Sterling doesn't play by the rules. He makes his own." "Then we make our own too," Caleb said. "Thomas, you're welcome here. We protect our own and your family to our wives, which makes you family to us." Thomas looked around at the rough men who'd married his cousins, saw the determination in their faces, the way they'd positioned themselves protectively near the women. "Thank you. They're lucky to have found you." "We're the lucky ones," Eli said, taking Jenny's hand. Over the next days, they prepared for Sterling's arrival like a military campaign. Thomas proved invaluable. He knew Sterling's tactics, his weaknesses, his arrogance. The documents were hidden in multiple locations, copies made and sent to lawyers in Helena and even San Francisco. The ranch was fortified with sight lines cleared and defensive positions established. The townspeople rallied by Reverend Mills and, surprisingly, by Mr. Garrison, who seemed determined to make amends for his past dishonesty, pledged their support. Sterling might have money, but the Daltons had something more valuable, a community that resented outsiders trying to impose their will. On the 5th day after the wedding, a procession of carriages appeared on the road. Sterling had arrived in style, 3 carriages, a dozen men, and enough luggage to suggest he planned an extended stay. The brothers and their wives waited on the porch, Thomas standing with them. His presence a shock Sterling wouldn't expect. The lead carriage door opened and Thaddeus Sterling emerged. He was exactly what they'd expected, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. His clothes were immaculate despite the journey, and he moved with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything he wanted. His eyes found the sisters immediately lingering on each in a way that made their husbands shift aggressively. Then they landed on Thomas, and for the first time Sterling's composure cracked. "Young Thomas, what an unexpected pleasure. I heard you were dead." "Disappointed?" Thomas asked pleasantly. "Merely surprised." Sterling recovered quickly, his cold smile returning. "Though it doesn't change anything, these women are still thieves, and these documents," he gestured to Marshal Brennan, who stood beside him, "prove it." "Interesting," Thomas said, "because I have documents that prove something quite different." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "What documents?" "The real ones. The ones you thought you'd destroyed." Thomas smiled. "You really should have checked that safe more carefully." "Thaddeus, Father always did keep copies of everything important. Even if you have papers, they won't stand against my word. I have influence connections. And I have something better," a new voice interrupted. Another stranger had ridden up this one wearing the badge of a Pinkerton detective, but not Harrison. "Detective James Crawford," the man introduced himself. "I've been investigating Mr. Sterling for fraud and conspiracy for 6 months, hired by a consortium of his former business partners whom he cheated. Mr. Vance's evidence combined with what I've gathered is more than enough for criminal charges." Sterling went pale, then red with rage. "This is preposterous, Brennan. Arrest these women immediately." Marshal Brennan hesitated. "Thaddeus, if there's an ongoing investigation..." I don't care about investigations. I want what's mine. But they're not yours, Eleanor said, stepping forward. We never were. We're free women, married women, and we're under the protection of the law, the real law, not the one you've tried to buy. Sterling's composure finally shattered completely. You little... He started forward, reaching for Eleanor, but never made it. Caleb's fist connected with Sterling's jaw with a satisfying crack, sending the man sprawling in the dust. Touch my wife again, and I'll do worse, he said calmly. Sterling scrambled to his feet, his immaculate clothes now covered in dirt. Brennan arrested him for assault. But Marshal Brennan was backing away. I think I need to review this situation more carefully. Detective Crawford, might I see your credentials and evidence? As Brennan and Crawford moved aside to talk, Sterling stood alone, his men uncertain, his power evaporating like morning mist. Harrison had disappeared entirely, probably fleeing when he saw which way the wind was blowing. It's over, Sterling, Thomas said. Leave now, and maybe you can avoid prison. Stay, and Detective Crawford will have you in custody within the hour. Sterling looked around wildly, seeing no support, no escape. His eyes landed on the sisters one last time, ugly with hatred. This isn't over. You'll do nothing, Luke said, and his hand was on his gun. Because if you ever come near our wives again, if you ever even think about threatening them, you won't make it back to Boston. That's not a threat, Sterling. That's a promise. Sterling must have seen the truth in Luke's eyes and all the brothers' eyes. These weren't civilized Eastern men who fought with words and laws. These were Montana men who protected their own with whatever force necessary. Without another word, Sterling turned and climbed back into his carriage. We're leaving, he barked to his men. Within minutes, the procession was retreating down the road, leaving only dust and the lingering smell of expensive cologne. Marshal Brennan cleared his throat. I'll need to make a full report, but I don't see any grounds for charges against anyone here. Detective Crawford's evidence against Mr. Sterling, however, is quite compelling. I'll be returning to Boston to assist in that investigation. After he left following Sterling's retreat, the 8 Daltons and Thomas stood in stunned silence. Is it really over? Jenny asked in a small voice. It's over, Detective Crawford confirmed. Sterling's going to have much bigger problems than pursuing you. The fraud charges alone will ruin him, and there's evidence of much worse. You're free. As Crawford rode away to follow Sterling and ensure he actually left the territory of the family, for that's what they were now, remained on the porch, hardly daring to believe it was over. We did it, Isabel said wonderingly. We actually did it. You did it, Luke corrected, pulling her against him. You were brave enough to run, brave enough to find us, brave enough to stand up to him. We all did it, Eleanor said, looking around at their strange, wonderful family. Together. That night they celebrated properly. Thomas played the piano, the one Isabel had brought in pieces, now assembled in the main room. They danced and laughed and toasted their freedom and their future. The shadow that had hung over them for so long was finally gone. As the evening wound down, the couples began to drift away to actually begin their married lives properly. Thomas discreetly made himself scarce, taking a bottle of whiskey to the bunkhouse to give the newlyweds privacy. Caleb and Eleanor stood on the porch looking out at the star-filled Montana sky. Thank you, Eleanor said softly, for believing us, for protecting us, for wanting us even with all the complications we brought. Thank you, Caleb replied, for being exactly the complication we needed. He pulled her closer. Eleanor Dalton, how does it feel to be free? She smiled, and for the first time since they'd arrived, it reached her eyes completely. Like coming home. In the garden, Eli and Jenny walked among the plants she'd coaxed back to life, planning next year's planting, their quiet voices mixing with the night sounds. By the corral, Luke and Isabel argued playfully about who was the better rider, their banter a thin excuse to stay close to each other. In the barn, Jonah showed Rosalind where she could set up a proper sewing room, describing his vision for expanding it while she sketched quick designs in her ever-present notebook. The Dalton Ranch, which had been slowly dying just months before, was now fully alive with love, laughter, and the promise of generations to come. 4 brothers, who'd taken a desperate chance on mail-order brides, had found so much more partners, friends, and a love strong enough to defeat any enemy. and 2,000 miles away in Boston. Thaddeus Sterling sat in a jail cell, his empire crumbling, his fortune seized, cursing the day he'd tried to claim what was never his to take. The Vance sisters were free, the Dalton brothers were complete, and the Montana sky stretched endless above them, all full of stars and infinite possibility. The first snow of winter came early that year, dusting the Montana mountains like sugar on Jenny's fresh-baked bread. 2 months had passed since Sterling's defeat, and the Dalton Ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and timeless. Thomas had stayed on, proving himself invaluable with his education and business acumen, helping Caleb expand their cattle operation with Eastern contacts he'd maintained despite his supposed death. But on this particular morning, as Eleanor stood at the kitchen window watching the snow fall, she felt a familiar unease creeping up her spine. She'd learned to trust these instincts. They'd kept her and her sisters alive through dangerous times. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, coming up behind her, his arms encircling her waist. He'd learned to read her moods with surprising accuracy in their short marriage. "I don't know," she admitted, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Something feels off." Before Caleb could respond, the sound of horses approaching made them both tense. Through the swirling snow, they could see a lone rider approaching, hunched against the cold. "That's Sam from the telegraph office," Caleb said, frowning. Sam only rode out to the ranches for urgent messages. They met him at the door, the other couples gathering as they sensed trouble. Sam's face was grim as he handed Caleb the telegram. "Came in this morning, marked urgent," he said. "From Boston." Eleanor's hands trembled as she read over Caleb's shoulder. "Sterling escaped prison. Stop. Killed 2 guards. Stop. Heading west. Stop. Crawford dead. Stop. Be ready. Stop. Harrison." The paper fluttered to the floor as Eleanor's knees buckled. Caleb caught her, his face dark with fury and fear. "Harrison," Luke snarled. "The detective who was working for Sterling. Why would he warn us?" Thomas picked up the telegram, studying it carefully. "Because Sterling turned on him. Word from Boston was that Harrison testified against Sterling to save himself from conspiracy charges. Sterling would want revenge on him too." "So he's coming here," Rosalind said quietly, her hand finding Jonah's. "He's coming to finish what he started." "How long do we have?" Caleb asked Sam. "Telegraph said he escaped 3 days ago. If he took the train as far as he could, then horses." Sam calculated. "Could be here in another 2-3 days, maybe less if he's pushing hard." "Thank you, Sam," Caleb said. "Ride back to town. Tell Sheriff Watson. Tell everyone. Sterling's a killer now, not just a fraudster." As Sam rode away, the family stood in tense silence. Finally, Jenny spoke, her voice small but determined. "We could run. Thomas has contacts in California. We could—" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm done running. This is our home. Our land. We stand and fight." "Eleanor's right," Isabel said, surprising everyone with the steel in her voice. "Sterling took everything from us once. He won't do it again." Luke pulled her close. "He'll have to go through us to get to you." "Through all of us," Eli added, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by quiet determination. Caleb looked around at his family, for that's what they all were, now bound by more than blood or law. "Then we prepare. Jonah, ride to the Hendersons and the Mackenzies. Tell them what's happening. They've had their own troubles with outsiders trying to take their land. They'll help." "I'll fortify the house," Luke said. "We've got ammunition, but we'll need more." "I'll go to town for supplies," Thomas offered, "and to see if anyone else has heard anything." As the men scattered to their tasks, the sisters gathered in the kitchen, their faces pale but resolute. "He won't stop," Eleanor said quietly. "Sterling's lost everything, his money, his reputation, his freedom. All he has left is revenge." "Then we take that from him too," Isabel said fiercely. Over the next 2 days, the ranch transformed into a fortress. Neighbors arrived with rifles and supplies, setting up watch posts. Sheriff Watson came with 2 deputies, making it clear that this time the law was on the Daltons' side. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house brought food and her sharpshooting husband. "That Sterling fellow tried to buy information about you girls when his man was in town," she said. "I didn't like him then, and I like him less now that he's a murderer." Even Mr. Garrison came shamefaced but determined. "I owe you folks. Let me help make it right." By the evening of the second day, nearly 20 people were scattered around the ranch waiting. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystal white and deadly quiet. It was Jenny who saw them first, her sharp eyes catching movement on the ridge. "There," she whispered to Eli, who was standing watch with her. "5, maybe 6 riders." The word spread quickly, and everyone took their positions. The sisters were supposed to stay inside protected, but Eleanor had flatly refused. "We're not hiding while you fight our battle," she'd told Caleb. "We can shoot. Our father made sure of that." Now she stood at an upstairs window with a rifle, Isabel beside her, while Rosalind and Jenny watched from other vantage points. The riders came slowly, cautiously. Sterling was in the lead, but he looked nothing like the polished gentleman who'd arrived weeks ago. His face was gaunt, unshaven, his expensive clothes replaced by rough traveling gear. The madness of obsession burned in his eyes. "Dalton," he shouted, "send out my property, and I might let the rest of you live." "The only property here is ours," Caleb called back from the porch. "And you're trespassing on it. Turn around, Sterling. It's over." Sterling laughed, a harsh sound that made Jenny shudder. "Over? It's never over. Those women belong to me. Their father sold them to me with his debts." "Their father's debts died with him," Thomas called out, revealing himself from his position. "And you know it, Sterling. That's why you had to forge those documents." Sterling's face contorted with rage. You ruined everything. You were supposed to be dead." "A lot of that going around," Thomas replied. "Except in your case, you made it happen. You killed those guards, Sterling. There's no coming back from that." "I don't want to come back," Sterling screamed. "I want what's mine." He reached for his gun, but never got it clear of the holster. 3 shots rang out simultaneously from Caleb Luke, and surprisingly from Eleanor's window. Sterling toppled from his horse, landing in the snow that quickly turned red beneath him. His men, hired guns with no real loyalty, immediately threw down their weapons. They'd been paid to intimidate, not to die in a hopeless shootout against a fortified position. Sheriff Watson and his deputies quickly took them into custody, while Caleb and Luke approached Sterling's still form cautiously. He was alive, but barely blood bubbling from his lips. "Should have been mine," he gasped, his eyes finding the window where Eleanor stood. "Everything should have been." "The only thing that's yours is a grave," Luke said coldly. Sterling's eyes went wide, then empty. The man who'd terrorized the sisters for so long was finally truly gone. There was no celebration this time, just a grim satisfaction that it was over. The neighbors helped bury Sterling in an unmarked grave on the edge of town, while his hired men were sent to Helena for trial. That evening, as the family gathered in the main room, exhausted but safe, Eleanor stood and raised a glass of her husband's whiskey. "To survival," she said. "To family. To home." "To home," they echoed and drank. But the toast was premature. The next morning brought another visitor, this one unexpected but not unwelcome, Detective Harrison himself, looking haggard and travel-worn. "I came as soon as I could," he said, standing awkwardly in their doorway. "I know I'm not welcome here, but I had to warn you personally." "You did warn us," Caleb said carefully. "Your telegram saved our lives." Harrison shook his head. "Sterling's dead then." "Yesterday," Luke confirmed. "Buried this morning." Harrison sagged with visible relief. "Thank God. But that's not why I'm here. There's something else. Something I discovered when I was investigating Sterling's finances for the trial." He pulled out a leather folder similar to the one Thomas had brought months ago. "Sterling wasn't the only one with claims on your father's estate. There was another creditor one Sterling was hiding because they had a prior claim. A man named Samuel Morrison." Eleanor frowned. "Morrison. That name. Wait, the Morrison Matrimonial Agency." Harrison nodded grimly. "The same. It wasn't coincidence that you all got responses from his agency. Morrison knew who you were, knew you were desperate. He's been playing a longer game than Sterling ever was." "What kind of game?" Caleb demanded. "The kind where he marries off desperate women to men he's researched, then shows up later with contracts they signed without reading the fine print. Contracts that give him claim to any property or assets they might acquire through marriage." The room went deadly silent. Then Isabel laughed, but it was bitter. So we escaped one trap just to fall into another. Not necessarily, Harrison said. I've been tracking Morrison for months now. He's done this to a dozen women across the frontier. But here's the thing, his contracts aren't legal if the marriages were performed under false pretenses. And sending you here knowing Sterling was after you, not telling the Daltons about the contracts, that's false pretenses. You're helping us, Eleanor said slowly. Why? Harrison met her eyes. Because I spent years helping Sterling destroy people, telling myself it was just business. When I saw what he really was, what I'd been part of, I need to make amends. Starting here. Thomas was already examining the documents Harrison had brought. These contracts, they're clever, but there are holes. With the right lawyer, already done, Harrison interrupted. There's a federal judge in Helena who's very interested in Morrison's activities. He's agreed to hear the case next month. If we can prove Morrison deliberately deceived both parties in these marriages, all his contracts become void. And Morrison, Luke asked, where is he? On his way here, actually. He should arrive tomorrow. He doesn't know Sterling's dead, doesn't know I'm here. He thinks he's walking into a situation where you're all vulnerable and desperate. Caleb smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then let's make sure he gets exactly what he deserves. The trap they set for Morrison was elegant in its simplicity. When he arrived the next day, a small, neat man with the face of a kindly grandfather and the eyes of a snake, he found the ranch apparently in chaos. The sisters were supposedly packing to leave the brothers arguing loudly about Sterling's death and its consequences. Morrison presented himself as a savior, offering to help sort out their legal troubles. It wasn't until he produced the contracts explaining how the sisters' marriages had inadvertently signed over their husband's property rights to him that the trap was sprung. That's interesting reading, Judge Coleman said, stepping out from the next room where he'd been listening. He'd ridden down from Helena at Harrison's urgent request, particularly the part where you claim the women signed these contracts freely and with full knowledge. Morrison went pale. Judge Coleman, I don't understand. I think you do, the judge said. Mr. Harrison here has provided extensive documentation of your scheme. Combined with what I've just witnessed you attempting to fraudulently claim property rights, I've seen enough. You can't prove anything, Morrison blustered. Those contracts are legal. These contracts, Eleanor asked sweetly, producing the originals from Morrison's own files, which Harrison had liberated during his investigation. The ones that were actually signed by women named Mary Smith Jane Brown and other aliases. The ones where you forged our real names later. Morrison's face went from pale to green. How did you... Mr. Harrison is very thorough, Thomas said, and very motivated to make amends for his past mistakes. Morrison tried to run, but Luke and Jonah were ready for that. Within minutes, he was in custody facing charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. As the judge prepared to leave with his prisoner, he turned to the assembled family. You folks have had quite a time of it, but I want you to know the law recognizes your marriages as completely valid, and any claims against this property are void. You're free and clear. After everyone left, the family stood together in their main room, almost unable to believe it was finally, truly over. No more threats, no more shadows from the past, no more men trying to claim what wasn't theirs. We need to celebrate, Isabel declared. Properly this time. A real party with music and dancing and a wedding. Thomas interrupted, then blushed as everyone turned to look at him. I mean, that is, Miss Sullivan from town and I have been corresponding and she's agreed to marry me. If you'll all stand as my family. The room erupted in delighted chaos, the sisters mobbing their cousin with embraces while the brothers slapped him on the back. Of course we'll stand with you, Caleb said. Your family, real family. 2 weeks later, the ranch hosted the largest celebration Promise Creek had ever seen. Thomas married his Susan, a practical woman with a warm smile who fit into their strange family like she'd always belonged. The whole town came to celebrate not just the wedding, but their collective victory over the forces that had tried to tear them apart. As the party swirled around them, Caleb and Eleanor slipped away to the porch, looking out over their land, their home. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked. The deception that brought you here. Eleanor considered the question. How can I regret the path that led me to you, to this? She gestured to the warm light spilling from the windows, the sound of laughter and music, the sight of their family whole, happy and free. Besides, she added with a smile, it wasn't really deception. Everything important was true. We did need husbands, you did need wives. We just arranged the details creatively. Caleb laughed, pulling her close. Very creatively. Although, Eleanor said thoughtfully, there is one more thing I haven't been entirely honest about. Caleb tensed. What? She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. We're going to need to expand the house in about 7 months. Caleb's whoop of joy brought everyone running, and soon the news had spread. The first of the next generation of Daltons was on the way. Within minutes, Jenny shyly announced that she too was expecting, and Isabel declared with typical drama that she refused to be left out and fully intended to be pregnant by Christmas. Rosalind just smiled mysteriously and said nothing, but Jonah's protective hovering told its own story. As the evening wound down, the 4 couples stood together looking out at the star-filled Montana sky. They'd begun as strangers brought together by desperate circumstances and creative correspondence. They'd faced threats that should have destroyed them, from Sterling's obsession to Morrison's schemes. But they'd survived, and more than survived, they'd thrived. They'd built something stronger than any of them could have imagined when those first letters were sent. They'd built a family. You know what I've been thinking, Eli said suddenly. We should write about this, the whole story. How 4 brothers found 4 sisters and made a family against all odds. Who would believe it? Jenny asked, leaning against him. Does it matter? Rosalind said. The best stories are the ones that seem impossible, but are true. The Dalton Brides, Isabel said dramatically. A tale of love, danger, and creative correspondence. The Vance Sisters, Eleanor corrected. A story of courage, family, and finding home where you least expect it. How about both? Caleb suggested. The whole story from both sides, letters and all. They all agreed, and over the following winter they did just that. The sisters and brothers together wrote down their story, complete with the letters that had started it, all the dangers they'd faced, and the love they'd found. The manuscript would eventually make its way to a publisher in San Francisco, where it would become one of the most popular romantic adventures of its time. But that was still in the future. For now, they simply stood together, 4 brothers and 4 sisters, who'd become one family, watching the stars wheel overhead and knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The ranch prospered in the years that followed. The children came strong sons and beautiful daughters who grew up knowing they were part of something special, a family built not just on blood, but on choice, courage, and commitment. Thomas and Susan added their own children to the mix, and the ranch expanded to accommodate them all. The main house grew rooms like a living thing, spreading out across the land that had once seemed so harsh and empty. Eleanor became the unofficial matriarch, managing not just the household, but much of the ranch's business dealings. Her shrewd intelligence, combined with Caleb's steady determination, built an empire that would last generations. Isabel's laughter filled the house, and her music, played on the piano that had arrived in pieces, became the soundtrack to their lives. She and Luke had the most children, 5 red-headed hellions who inherited their mother's spirit and their father's stubbornness. Rosalind's quilts became famous throughout Montana, each one telling a story in fabric and thread. She and Jonah built a workshop where she taught other women her craft, creating beauty in the harsh landscape. Their 3 children inherited her artistic eye and his thoughtful nature. Jenny overcame her fears, becoming the heart of the home. Her garden expanded year by year until it was the envy of the county. She and Eli had 2 daughters and a son, all as gentle and kind as their parents. Harrison stayed in the area, eventually becoming a respected lawyer specializing in protecting women's rights in marriage contracts. He never fully forgave himself for his part in Sterling's schemes, but the Daltons forgave him, and that was enough. The letters that had started it all were preserved, eventually framed and hung in the main room of the ranch house. Visitors would often ask about them, and the family would tell the story how 4 brothers seeking wives and 4 sisters seeking sanctuary had found each other through creative correspondence, and against all odds built something beautiful and lasting. But the most important part of the story wasn't the danger they'd faced or the villains they'd defeated. It was the simple truth that love, real love, could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. That family was more than blood, and home was more than a place. It was the people who stood by you when danger came calling, who believed in you when you deceived them, who chose you every day despite everything. As Eleanor would write in her memoir years later, "We came to Montana as desperate women running from a terrible fate. We found 4 men who were running from loneliness and despair. Together we stopped running and started building, and what we built was worth every risk we took to find it." The Dalton Ranch still stands today, though much changed and modernized. The original house is now a museum, those framed letters its most popular exhibit. Visitors come from around the world to see where 4 mail-order brides and 4 Montana brothers prove that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, and the strongest love is the one that's tested by fire and emerges refined like gold. But that's a story for historians and tourists. For the Daltons themselves, the story was simpler. It was about coming home. And in the end, that's all any love story really is. The journey of finding where you belong and who you belong with against all odds and expectations. And if that journey involves a little creative correspondence, a few hidden truths, and the occasional villain who needs defeating, well, that just makes the homecoming all the sweeter. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, melting the heavy snows and turning the Montana earth into rich mud that promised good growing. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the expanded ranch house, her hand resting on her growing belly, watching as her sisters worked in the garden that now stretched nearly an acre. The morning sickness had finally passed, leaving her with an energy that Caleb joked was more frightening than any of Sterling's threats had been. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor if you keep pacing," Isabel called out, dirt smudged across her cheek, as she helped Jenny plant the early vegetables. Her own condition was just beginning to show, though she'd announced it with typical fanfare on Christmas Eve, just as she'd promised. "I'm not pacing, I'm supervising," Eleanor replied, but there was affection in her voice. The past months had brought a peace she'd never thought possible, yet something nagged at her, a feeling that their story wasn't quite finished. That feeling crystallized when Thomas came riding hard from town, his face grim. Susan was with him, her usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious worry. "We have a problem," Thomas said without preamble as he dismounted. "I just got word from Boston. Sterling's estate is being settled, and his lawyers have discovered something." The family gathered quickly, the brothers abandoning their work at the urgency in Thomas's voice. "What could they possibly discover that matters now?" Caleb asked. "Sterling's dead, Morrison's in prison. We're free." Thomas pulled out a letter, his hands shaking slightly. "Sterling had a son. A legitimate son from a marriage 20 years ago that he kept secret. The Boywell man now has been in Europe studying. He's coming to claim his inheritance, and part of that claim includes recovering property stolen by the Vance sisters." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. A son Sterling never mentioned, because the boy's mother left him when she discovered what he really was, Susan interjected. "She took the child to France, raised him there, but now she's dead and the son, William Sterling, has returned to claim his birthright." "Let him come," Luke said flatly. "His father tried that already. Didn't work out well for him." "This is different," Thomas warned. "William Sterling is nothing like his father, at least not in methods. He's educated, sophisticated, and worst of all, he's legitimate. He has actual legal standing, and he's hired the best lawyers in Boston." Rosalind, who'd been quiet, suddenly gasped. "The quilts! Oh God, the quilts!" Everyone turned to her in confusion. She was pale, her hands pressed to her mouth. "What about the quilts?" Jonah asked gently. "Mother's jewelry, we sewed it into my quilts for safekeeping when we fled. Diamonds, rubies, her pearl necklace. Everything valuable we had left. I've been so careful, but if Sterling's son has documentation about specific pieces, he could claim we really did steal them." Eleanor finished, her mind racing. "Even though they were ours if we can't prove it, we have your mother's will," Caleb reminded them. "Which his lawyers will claim is forged just as Sterling did," Thomas said grimly. "And this time they have better documentation. I've seen some of it. Sterling kept meticulous records of everything he claimed to own, including detailed descriptions of the jewelry." Jenny, who'd been silent, suddenly spoke up. "There's something else. Something I never told anyone." She was trembling, and Eli immediately put his arm around her. "What is it, love?" he asked gently. The night before we left Boston, I went back to Father's office. I knew Sterling had men watching, but I had to try. I found something in Father's real ledger, the one he kept hidden. It shows that Mother's jewelry was never part of the business assets. It was held in trust for us separate from everything else. "You have this ledger?" Eleanor asked urgently. Jenny nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared. I hid it in my doll, the one I insisted on bringing, even though you said I was too old for dolls. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I was afraid you'd make me leave it behind, and I knew we might need proof someday." Eleanor crossed to her youngest sister, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "You brilliant, brave girl. You may have just saved us all." But their relief was short-lived. 3 days later, William Sterling arrived in Promise Creek with an entourage that made his father's look modest. 6 lawyers, a federal judge, and most troublingly, a Pinkerton detective who'd supposedly found new evidence. William himself was a surprise. Where Thaddeus had been cold and predatory, William was warm, charming, with an easy smile and gentlemanly manners. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair, and his father's sharp features softened by what seemed like genuine kindness. He came to the ranch alone against his lawyer's advice, riding up on a beautiful black horse, as if he were just a neighbor come to call. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, removing his hat and bowing slightly to Eleanor. "I'm William Sterling. I believe we have matters to discuss." "Mr. Sterling," Eleanor replied carefully, "I'm sorry for the loss of your father." His smile was rueful. "Don't be. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, and from what I've learned, he became a monster. What he tried to do to you and your sisters was unforgivable." The unexpected sympathy threw them all off balance. Luke, never one for subtlety, demanded, "Then why are you here?" "Because Mr. Dalton, while my father's methods were wrong, some of his claims were not. My mother's jewelry pieces that belonged to my grandmother and should have come to me are among the items you took from Boston." "We took nothing that wasn't ours," Isabel said hotly. William studied her, then smiled. "You have my mother's fire. She would have liked you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. This was her wearing the necklace in question. They all looked at the photograph of a beautiful woman wearing an elaborate pearl necklace. It was indeed one of the pieces hidden in Rosalind's quilts, but it was also the piece specifically mentioned in their mother's will. "That necklace was given to our mother by our grandmother," Eleanor said carefully. "It was never your mother's." "Prove it," William said, but not unkindly. "Look, I don't want to fight you. I don't want to drag this through courts or cause you more pain. But I have responsibilities to my mother's memory and to her family in France, who believe those jewels are rightfully mine." "What are you proposing?" Caleb asked, recognizing a negotiation when he heard one. William looked around the ranch, taking in the prosperity, the obvious happiness of the couples before him. "A trade. You keep everything else, the money, the properties, whatever other assets you salvaged. I take only the jewelry that can be documented as coming from my mother's family. 3 pieces in total." "And if we refuse," Luke asked, "then my lawyers will file suit and will spend years in court. You might win or you might lose everything. Either way, the legal fees alone will bankrupt you." It was elegantly done, a threat wrapped in silk delivered with a sympathetic smile. William Sterling was indeed nothing like his father, which made him far more dangerous. "We need time to consider," Eleanor said. "Of course. I'll be staying in town for a week. After that, I'll need an answer." He mounted his horse, then paused. "For what it's worth, I truly am sorry for what my father put you through. I hope we can resolve this peacefully." After he left, the family erupted in debate. Luke wanted to fight Eli to negotiate Jonah to seek legal counsel. But it was Jenny who provided the solution once again, proving that the quietest among them often saw the clearest. "We prove it," she said simply. "Father's ledger shows the jewelry purchases and their designations. Mother's will lists them specifically, and—" She paused, gathering courage. "I have letters, Mother's letters to her sister in Philadelphia talking about the jewelry and what she wanted us to have." "You have these letters?" Eleanor asked, amazed. Jenny nodded. "I took everything I could carry that night. I was so afraid we'd need proof of who we were, where we came from." They spent the next 2 days preparing their case with Thomas and Harrison, who'd returned to help organizing the documentation. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house arrived with an elderly woman none of them recognized. "This is Mrs. Adelaide Worthington," she announced. "She's William Sterling's maternal aunt." The elegant elderly woman studied the sisters with sharp eyes. "You have my nephew in quite a state," she said dryly. "He's convinced you have his inheritance, while his lawyers are convinced he's being too soft on you." "Mrs. Worthington," Eleanor began, but the woman held up a hand. "I knew your mother," she said, surprising them all. "We were friends before she married your father before I moved to France with my sister. I know exactly which pieces belong to whom." She pulled out a leather journal, its pages yellow with age. "My sister kept meticulous records, as did I. Every piece of jewelry in both families is documented here, including the ones my nephew claims." She opened the journal, pointing to specific entries. "The pearl necklace was indeed your grandmother's, given to your mother on her wedding day. The ruby brooch was my sister's, given to her by Thaddeus as an engagement gift. The diamond earrings were purchased by your father for your mother's birthday." "So William has claim to one piece, the brooch," Caleb summarized. "Precisely. And knowing my nephew, that's all he really wants. The rest is his lawyer's doing." She stood preparing to leave. "I'll speak with William. He's a good boy, nothing like his father. He'll listen to reason." But before she could leave, William himself arrived, having somehow learned of his aunt's visit. "Aunt Adelaide," he said, his voice mixing affection and frustration, "you weren't supposed to arrive until next week. And miss all the drama." "Hardly." She turned to him, her expression stern. "William James Sterling, you will listen to me now. These women have suffered enough at your father's hands. You will not add to their burden. I'm not trying to— You are, whether you mean to or not. Now I've reviewed the documentation. You have legitimate claim to exactly one piece, your mother's ruby brooch. Accept it gracefully and leave these good people in peace." William looked at the assembled family, then at his aunt, and finally laughed a genuine warm sound. "You always could see through me, Aunt Adelaide." He turned to Eleanor. "She's right, of course. I only ever wanted something of my mother's. The lawyers insisted on pressing for more, but you're not your father," Eleanor said, understanding dawning. "God, I hope not." The pain in his voice was real. "I've spent my entire life trying to be different from him. When I learned what he'd done to you, what he'd tried to do, I was horrified. But I also thought if I could recover something of my mother's, something untainted by him." Rosalind stood and left the room, returning moments later with a small wrapped bundle. "The ruby brooch," she said, offering it to him. "It's beautiful. Your mother had excellent taste." William took it with shaking hands, unwrapping it carefully. The brooch caught the light, sparkling like captured fire. "She wore this every day," he said softly. "It was the one thing she took when she left him." "Then how—" Eleanor began. "She sent it back when she was dying with a letter saying it belonged with the Sterling estate. I think she was trying to ensure I had some claim to inheritance, but she didn't know about your family's situation." He wrapped the brooch carefully and placed it in his pocket. "Thank you. This is all I wanted." He turned to his aunt. "Will you draw up the papers? I want it legal and binding. I relinquish all claims to any other property or assets these ladies might possess." As the lawyers were summoned and documents prepared, William lingered, clearly wanting to say more. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, recognizing his hesitation. "I have something for you," he said, producing a packet of letters. "These were in my father's private papers. Letters from your parents to each other from before his business troubles. I thought you might want them." Eleanor took the letters with trembling hands. "Why would you do this?" "Because everyone deserves to remember the good times before everything went wrong," William said simply. "And because I hope someday my children won't have to be ashamed of the Sterling name." "They won't," Jenny said, suddenly surprising everyone. "Not if they're anything like you." The business was concluded quickly after that. William signed away any claims, took his aunt and his lawyers, and prepared to leave. But before he did, he made one last stop at the ranch. "I wanted to thank you," he said to the assembled family, "for showing me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty, and that family is about more than blood or legal documents." "What will you do now?" Caleb asked. "Go back to France, I think. Start fresh. Build something good with the Sterling name." He smiled. "Maybe even find a wife who isn't afraid of the family history." Any woman would be lucky to have you, Isabel said impulsively, then blushed. I mean, you're nothing like your father. William laughed. The highest compliment I could receive. He mounted his horse, then looked back one more time. Be happy, he said simply. Be happy and live well. It's the best revenge against men like my father. As he rode away, Adelaide Worthington lingered a moment longer. You've given him peace, she told Eleanor. He's been haunted by his father's legacy his entire life. This your forgiveness, your grace, it's freed him. He freed himself, Eleanor replied, by choosing to be better. The old woman smiled. Wisdom beyond your years, my dear. Your mother would be proud. After they left, the family stood together processing what had just happened. That was unexpected, Luke said finally. Good unexpected, Isabel corrected. He could have made our lives miserable, but he chose not to. He chose to be the man his father never was, Jonah observed thoughtfully. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Eleanor opened the packet of letters William had given them. They were love letters, written in their parents' younger days, full of hope and dreams and plans for the future. Listen to this, Eleanor said, reading from one of their father's letters. My darling Margaret, I dream of the day our home is filled with the laughter of children, when our daughters will run through these rooms in silk and lace, and our sons will carry on the family name with honor. He got the daughter's part right, Isabel set her hand on her growing belly, though I don't know about silk and lace on a ranch. And we'll have sons to carry on the Dalton name, Jenny added, blushing as she admitted what she'd recently discovered she was carrying twins. Dalton sons and daughters, Rosalind corrected. Our children will know both their heritages. As Eleanor continued reading the letters aloud, sharing their parents' words with her sisters. For the first time, she felt something settle in her chest. The past was finally truly behind them. Sterling was dead, his son had chosen reconciliation over revenge, and Morrison was in prison. The threats that had driven them from Boston were gone. More importantly, they'd built something their parents could never have imagined, a family forged, not just by blood, but by choice, by struggle, by love, that had been tested and proven true. There's one more letter, Eleanor said, pulling out a sealed envelope. It's addressed to my daughters to be opened when you're safe. They all leaned in as she broke the seal and unfolded the paper, their mother's elegant handwriting still clear after all these years. My darling girls, Eleanor read, her voice thick with emotion. If you're reading this, then you've survived whatever storms life has brought you. I write this knowing that dark times may come. Your father's business troubles grow daily, and I fear what might happen when I'm gone. But I also write this with faith. Faith that you will stay together, that you will protect each other, that you will find your way to safety and happiness. The jewelry I leave you is more than mere stones and metal. Each piece carries a story, a memory, a piece of our family's heart. But remember, my loves, that your true inheritance is not in things but in each other. Your sisters are your strength, your courage, your home. I pray you'll find good men who'll see your worth, who'll cherish not just your beauty, but your spirits, your minds, your hearts. Men who'll understand that in marrying one of you, they gain all of you, for you are not just sisters, but pieces of one soul. Be brave, my daughters. Be true. And above all, stay together. All my love, Mother. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when Eleanor finished reading. Even the brothers were affected. Luke turning away to roughly wipe his face, Caleb's arm tightening around Eleanor. She knew, Jenny whispered. Somehow she knew we'd need each other. And she was right, Rosalind said. We found our way to safety and happiness just as she hoped. Together, Isabel added, reaching for her sister's hands. The months that followed brought their own challenges and joys. The babies came first. Eleanor's son, strong and loud from his first breath. Then Jenny's twins, a boy and a girl, who were immediately spoiled by everyone, and finally Isabel's daughter, who inherited her mother's red hair and her father's stubborn streak. Rosalind's baby came with the spring, a quiet, observant boy who seemed to study the world with artist's eyes from the moment he was born. The ranch prospered, expanding with each season. They bought the neighboring property when Old Man Henderson died, doubling their grazing land. The cattle thrived, the crops grew abundant, and the house continued to expand to accommodate their growing family. Thomas and Susan had their own children, adding to the cheerful chaos. Harrison, who'd stayed and started a law practice in town, eventually married Mrs. Patterson's niece, a sharp-tongued young woman who kept him honest and humble. One evening, 5 years after that first stagecoach had brought the sisters to Montana, they all gathered for Thanksgiving. The table stretched the entire length of the main room, laden with food from Jenny's garden and Eleanor's careful management. Children ran between the adults' legs. Laughter rang from every corner, and the house that had once been so empty now burst with life. "A toast," Caleb said, standing with his glass raised. "To creative correspondence." "To desperate gambles that pay off," Luke added. "To family both born and chosen," Jonah contributed. "To staying together against all odds," Eli finished. Eleanor stood, her own glass raised. "To our parents who loved us enough to prepare us for anything. To our husbands who were brave enough to take us as we are. To our children who will inherit not just land and names, but the knowledge that love conquers fear, family defeats enemies, and sometimes the best things come from the most unlikely beginnings." "Hear, hear," they all cried and drank. As the evening wore on and the children were put to bed, the adults gathered around the fireplace. Isabel played the piano softly, while couples danced or simply held each other close. "Do you ever think about how different it could have been?" Rosalind asked quietly. "If we hadn't taken that chance, if we hadn't come here—" "Don't," Eleanor said firmly. "That way lies madness. We made our choice and it led us here. That's all that matters. Besides," Isabel called from the piano, "can you imagine us as Sterling's playthings, or married off to whoever Morrison chose? We'd have probably murdered someone by now." "Isabel," Jenny protested, but she was laughing. "She's not wrong," Luke said. "You four are the strongest, most determined women I've ever met. You'd have found a way to survive, no matter what." "But we didn't just survive," Eleanor said, looking around at their home, their family, their life. "We thrived. We built something beautiful from deception and desperation." "The most beautiful things often come from the ugliest beginnings," Jonah said philosophically. "Pearls from irritation, diamonds from pressure. Love from loneliness," Eli added softly, pulling Jenny closer. "Family from strangers," Caleb finished. As the fire burned low and couples began drifting off to their rooms, Eleanor stood at the window looking out at the vast Montana sky. The same sky that had seemed so foreign and frightening when they'd first arrived now felt like home. "No regrets?" Caleb asked, coming up behind her. "Not one," she said firmly. "Every lie, every fear, every moment of terror, it all led to this, to you, to our family. How could I regret the path that brought me home?" He kissed her temple, and they stood together watching the stars, two people who'd found each other across impossible odds and built something worth fighting for. In her pocket, Eleanor carried her mother's letter, worn soft from reading. Its message had proven true. Their real inheritance hadn't been jewelry or money, but each other, the bonds between sisters that had kept them together through everything. And now those bonds had expanded, weaving in four brothers, cousin Thomas, Susan, their children, and even former enemies turned allies. The family that had started with four desperate sisters had grown into something magnificent, a testament to the power of love, loyalty, and the courage to take desperate chances. The Dalton Ranch stood strong against the Montana Sky Shelter, and home to a family that proved love could indeed conquer all, even fear, even lies, even the shadows of the past. 10 years had transformed the Dalton Ranch into something that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who'd known it in those desperate days before the sisters arrived. The main house had grown into a sprawling complex with wings added for each growing family, connected by covered walkways that Jenny had lined with flowering vines. Children's laughter echoed constantly through the halls, 12 of them now, with another on the way, as Isabel had announced just that morning with her typical dramatic flair. Eleanor stood in what they'd come to call the War Room, Caleb's office, where she kept the ranch's books and managed their expanding empire. At 42, she'd grown into her authority, her dark hair now streaked with premature silver that Caleb said made her look even more beautiful. Through the window, she could see her eldest son, James, now 9, helping his father with the horses. The boy had Caleb's steady nature, but her sharp mind a combination that would serve him well when he inherited the ranch's management. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting one of her sisters, or perhaps Thomas with news from town. Instead, a stranger entered, a young woman, perhaps 25, with expensive clothes covered in trail dust and eyes red from crying. She clutched a worn envelope in her trembling hands. "Mrs. Dalton, Eleanor Dalton." "Yes," Eleanor said carefully, her hand moving instinctively toward the drawer where Caleb insisted she keep a pistol. "How can I help you?" "My name is Catherine Morrison," the woman said, and Eleanor's blood ran cold. "My father is Samuel Morrison." Eleanor's hand found the pistol's grip, though she didn't draw it. "If you're here seeking revenge for your father—" "No," Catherine said quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, I'm here because I need help, because I've learned what my father did to you and others, and because—" She took a shuddering breath. "Because he's doing it again, and this time I'm one of his victims." Eleanor studied the young woman carefully, looking for deception, but found only desperation that reminded her painfully of her own situation all those years ago. "Sit down," she said finally. "Tell me everything." Catherine's story spilled out in fits and starts. Morrison had been released from prison 2 years ago, his sentence reduced for good behavior. He'd immediately returned to his schemes, but with a new twist, he was now targeting wealthy families arranging marriages for their daughters to men he controlled, then using those marriages to gain access to family fortunes. "He's my father, but I didn't know," Catherine said brokenly. "My mother left him when I was a baby, told me he was dead. I only learned the truth 6 months ago when he found me. He said he wanted to make amends, to be a family. I was so happy to have a father." She broke down sobbing. Eleanor moved around the desk, offering the girl a handkerchief. "What happened?" "He arranged a marriage for me, to a man named Charles Brennan." "Brennan?" Eleanor interrupted sharply. "As in Marshall Brennan Sterling's cousin." Catherine nodded miserably. "The same family. Charles is the Marshall's son. Father said it was a good match, that Charles was wealthy and respectable. But after the wedding, I learned the truth. Charles is deeply in debt from gambling, and the marriage contract my father had me sign gives him control of my inheritance from my mother, nearly $100,000. Eleanor felt sick. Morrison had learned from his mistakes, creating even more elaborate traps. "Where is Charles now?" "Dead," Catherine said bluntly. "He died 2 weeks ago in a saloon fight. But my father says the contract still stands, that the debt passes to him as Charles's creditor. He's coming here." "Here? Why?" Catherine pulled out the envelope she'd been clutching. "Because of this. I found it in his papers. It's a deed he somehow acquired the mineral rights to your land years ago before he went to prison. He never filed it because he was arrested, but now he says there's silver in your mountains and he's coming to claim it." Eleanor grabbed the document, scanning it quickly. Her heart sank as she recognized the official seals, the dates that predated their marriages. If this was real— "We need to gather everyone," Eleanor said urgently. "Now." Within an hour, the entire family had assembled, all 4 couples, Thomas and Susan, even Harrison, who'd ridden out from town. Catherine sat nervously in their midst, clearly overwhelmed by the sheer number of Daltons. "This is a disaster," Thomas said after examining the deed. "If this is legitimate, Morrison owns the mineral rights. He could force us to allow mining operations destroy the land, or force us to buy him out for an exorbitant sum," Eleanor finished grimly. "How did he even get this?" Luke demanded. Catherine answered quietly. "He said he won it in a card game from someone named Sterling just before Sterling came after you the first time. He was going to use it as leverage, but got arrested before he could." "Sterling—" Isabel spat the name like a curse. "Even dead, that man haunts us." "There has to be a way to fight this," Caleb said, his jaw clenched. "We've built too much to lose it now." "Actually," Harrison said slowly, "there might be. Catherine, you said you married Charles Brennan 2 months ago." "Yes." "And he died 2 weeks ago." She nodded. "Then you're his widow. His debts died with him unless you specifically agreed to assume them. Did you sign anything after his death?" No, I ran. I came straight here when I found out what my father was planning. Harrison smiled, the expression sharp. Then Morrison has no claim on your inheritance. Moreover, as Charles's widow, you might have claim to any assets he possessed, including anything Morrison gave him as part of their arrangement. But the mineral rights, Eleanor began, were obtained through a gambling debt with Sterling, who was a convicted criminal at the time of his death, Harrison continued. Any contracts or debts he held could be challenged as products of criminal enterprise. It's thin, Thomas warned. It's something, Caleb countered. He looked at Catherine. Are you willing to fight your father? He's not my father, Catherine said with surprising venom. A father protects his children. He sold me like cattle. Yes, I'll fight him. Then you'll stay here, Eleanor declared. You're under our protection now. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Jenny said gently. We know what it's like to be hunted by men who think they own us. You're safe here. The preparations began immediately. Harrison rode to Helena to file legal challenges to the mineral rights deed. Thomas began investigating Morrison's recent activities, looking for other victims who might testify against him. The ranch itself was fortified once again, though this time they had many more defenders. The older children were crack shots trained by their parents and fiercely protective of their home. Morrison arrived 3 days later with a small army of hired thugs and a smug smile that Eleanor wanted to shoot off his face. He'd aged poorly in prison, his thin frame now gaunt, his eyes sunken, but still sharp with greed. Mrs. Dalton, he called from beyond rifle range, I've come to discuss business. We have no business with you, Morrison, Caleb called back. Oh, but you do. I own the mineral rights to this land. I'm prepared to begin mining operations immediately, unless you'd prefer to make a more civilized arrangement. Your deed is being challenged in court, Eleanor announced, and your daughter is under our protection. Morrison's face darkened. Catherine is confused, manipulated by grief. As her father, I demand. You demand nothing. Catherine appeared on the porch, flanked by the sisters. You sold me to a drunk and a gambler. You're no father of mine. Ungrateful child, Morrison snarled. Everything I did was for your future. Everything you did was for your greed, she shot back. Just like with these women, just like with all your victims. But it ends here. Morrison laughed an ugly sound. Does it? I have 30 men legally hired to protect my mining interests. You have, 4 aging cowboys and their broodmares. The insult to the sisters was a mistake. Luke's rifle cracked the bullet, kicking up dust inches from Morrison's feet. The next one goes higher, Luke called. Insult our wives again and find out how high. You wouldn't dare, Morrison said, but he'd taken a step back. I have the law on my side. Actually, you don't, a new voice called out. Sheriff Watson rode up with a full posse, including several federal marshals. Samuel Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and violating the terms of your parole. Morrison went pale. What? On whose authority? Mine, one of the federal marshals said. We've been investigating your activities since your release. Mrs. Brennan here provided the final evidence we needed, documents showing you knowingly arranged a fraudulent marriage for financial gain. Catherine, you stupid girl! His words were cut off as the marshals moved in, binding his hands. His hired thugs, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quickly dispersed. This isn't over, Morrison shouted as he was dragged away. That deed is legal. I'll be back. No, Harrison said, arriving just then with a satisfied smile. You won't. The territorial judge has ruled the deed invalid, obtained through criminal conspiracy. The mineral rights remain with the Daltons. As Morrison was taken away, screaming threats and curses, Catherine collapsed into Eleanor's arms, sobbing with relief. It's over, Eleanor soothed. You're free. I have nowhere to go, Catherine whispered. No family, no home. You have us, Rosalind said firmly, if you want. And so Catherine Morrison, who quickly took back her mother's maiden name of Foster, became part of the extended Dalton family. She proved to have a sharp mind for business, helping Eleanor manage the ranch's accounts, and eventually catching the eye of a young lawyer from Helena, who was utterly charmed by her combination of beauty and brilliance. But that was still in the future. For now, the family gathered once again in their great room, celebrating another victory over those who would try to tear them apart. You know, Isabel said, her hand on her swelling belly, we should write all this down, the whole story from the beginning. Who would believe it? Luke asked, though he was smiling as he said it. Does it matter? It's our story. Our children should know it, how their mothers were mail-order brides who weren't what they seemed, how their fathers were brave enough to keep them anyway. How love can grow from deception, Jonah added thoughtfully. How family is more than blood, Eli contributed. How together we can face anything, Jenny finished. Eleanor looked around at them all, her sisters, their husbands, their children playing at their feet, Thomas and Susan Harrison, and his wife, now Catherine, too. This patchwork family built from desperate circumstances and held together by love and determination. We should call it 4 brothers, 4 sisters, she said. Too simple, Isabel protested. It needs drama, love and lies on the Montana frontier. Too sensational, Rosalind countered. The Dalton Family Chronicles. Boring, Luke said. How about how we survived everything and still like each other? They all laughed, and the debate continued late into the night, stories flowing like wine memories shared and polished into legend. The children listened with wide eyes, hardly believing their parents had lived such adventures. Young James Dalton, heir to the ranch, raised his hand. But, Mama, why did you lie in the first place? Couldn't you have just told the truth? Eleanor pulled her son close, thinking of how to explain desperation and fear to a child who'd never known either. Sometimes, she said carefully, the truth isn't enough to save you. Sometimes you have to create your own truth, forge your own path. We lied about our names, yes, but we were truthful about everything that mattered, our skills, our intentions, our hearts. Your mother and aunts were the bravest women I've ever known, Caleb added. They risked everything to stay together and find safety. And your fathers were brave enough to trust us despite the deception, Eleanor continued. That's what love is, choosing to believe in each other even when there are reasons not to. Will we have adventures like yours? James's younger sister Mary asked. I hope not, Eleanor said fervently, making everyone laugh. I hope you'll have peaceful, happy lives without anyone trying to claim you or steal from you. But if adventure finds you, Isabel added with a grin, you'll be ready. You're Daltons. You come from fighters. As the evening wound down and families drifted to their separate wings, Eleanor found herself once again at the window, looking out at the vast Montana sky. Caleb joined her as he always did, his arm around her waist. Any regrets? He asked their old ritual. Never, she answered, as always. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if we'd been honest from the start. You'd probably have been married off to 4 different men across the territory, Caleb said practically. And we'd have gotten 4 women who couldn't stand each other, or us. So the lying was a good thing. The lying brought you to me, he said simply. I'd forgive 1,000 lies for that gift. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. We've built something amazing, haven't we? We have, and it's not done yet. The children will carry it forward, make it even better. James wants to go to college, Eleanor said, to study agriculture and business, bring new methods to the ranch. Good. And Mary wants to be a doctor. Eleanor smiled. Isabel's influence, no doubt. The girls will have choices we never did, Caleb said. They won't have to lie or run or marry strangers to be safe. Because we did, Eleanor said softly. We broke that path so they wouldn't have to. A cry from the nursery interrupted them, the newest addition, Isabel's 3rd child, demanding attention. They could hear Luke's heavy footsteps, then his gentle voice soothing the baby. Even after all these years, the contrast between his rough exterior and tender heart made Eleanor smile. I should check on Catherine, Eleanor said. This has been overwhelming for her. She found the young woman in the library reading through the journal they'd started keeping of their story. This is incredible, Catherine said. You really did all this face down Sterling Morrison the first time, all of it. We did what we had to do, Eleanor said, sitting beside her, just as you did. I ran to strangers for help. You ran to family, Eleanor corrected. You just didn't know it yet. Catherine smiled tremulously. Mrs. Dalton Eleanor, why did you trust me? I could have been lying, could have been part of another scheme. Eleanor considered the question. Because I saw myself in you desperate, frightened, but determined. And because I've learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come from taking chances on people. Like the brothers took a chance on you. Exactly like that. They sat in comfortable silence, the house settling around them with the familiar creaks and sighs of a well-lived-in home. What happened to William Sterling? Catherine asked suddenly. Thaddeus's son. Eleanor smiled. He writes occasionally. He married a French woman, has 3 children. He's built a shipping company that's apparently quite successful. He sent a gift when James was born, a silver rattle with an apology engraved on it. An apology? For the sins of the father. We've invited him to visit, but he says he's not ready yet. Maybe someday. You'd welcome him after everything. He chose to be better than his blood demanded, Eleanor said. That's a choice I respect. Besides, family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, commitment, love. We've built our family from strangers, enemies, and everything in between. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, a full wagon train of women, 23 in all, led by a severe-looking matron who introduced herself as Mrs. Blackwood. We've heard of you, she announced without preamble. The Vance sisters who became the Dalton wives. We've come seeking your advice. The women, it turned out, were all mail-order brides heading to various destinations across Montana and Wyoming, but they'd heard stories, some true, some wildly exaggerated, about the sisters' experiences. We're scared, one young woman admitted. What if the men aren't who they say they are? What if we're walking into danger? Eleanor looked at her sisters, saw the same thought in their eyes. These women needed what they'd had each other. Stay here for a few days, Eleanor offered. We'll teach you what we know. What followed was perhaps the strangest finishing school ever conducted. The sisters taught the women everything from how to judge a man's character from his letters to how to load and shoot a rifle. Isabel taught them songs to keep their spirits up. Rosalind showed them how to make beauty in harsh places. Jenny shared her gardening secrets for making anything grow anywhere, and Eleanor taught them to read contracts and keep accounts. The brothers, initially bemused by the invasion of women, found themselves drafted as well. Caleb taught them what to look for in good land versus bad. Luke showed them basic veterinary skills for livestock. Jonah taught them to read weather patterns, and Eli demonstrated emergency medical treatment. You're creating an army, Thomas joked, watching the women practice shooting. We're creating a sisterhood, Eleanor corrected. These women will remember each other, write to each other, help each other. They won't be alone like we were. One of the women, a small redhead named Patricia, asked the question they were all thinking. But what if we don't love them? What if we marry these men and never grow to love them? It was Rosalind who answered, her quiet voice carrying surprising authority. Love isn't always lightning and thunder. Sometimes it's a seed that needs time and care to grow. We didn't love our husbands when we arrived. We were too scared, too desperate. But we chose to try, and they chose to let us. And if it doesn't grow, Patricia pressed. Then you'll still have each other, Isabel said firmly. Write to us to each other. We'll help you find a way forward, whether that's making the marriage work or finding a safe way to leave. When the women left 3 days later, they were different, stronger, more confident, bonded together by shared knowledge and mutual support. They would spread across the frontier, but they would stay connected, a network of women who understood each other's struggles. We've started something, Jenny said, watching the wagon train disappear. Good, Eleanor said fiercely. No woman should have to face what we faced alone. The years that followed saw the Dalton Ranch become an unofficial way station for women heading west. Mail-order brides, widows seeking new starts. Even fallen women looking for redemption, they all found temporary shelter and permanent support at the ranch. Some stayed marrying local men or finding work in the growing town. Catherine Foster married her lawyer and settled in Promise Creek, becoming the town's first female bank manager. Patricia, the redhead from the wagon train, ended up not marrying her intended. At all, she opened a dress shop in Helena and became quite successful, always crediting the Dalton women for giving her the courage to forge her own path. The children grew up surrounded by these stories of courage and reinvention. James did go to college, returning with new ideas that doubled the ranch's productivity. Mary became not just a doctor, but the first female doctor in the territory, trained partly by books and partly by sheer determination inherited from her mother and aunts. The other children found their own paths. Some stayed on the ranch. Others ventured into the world, but all carried with them the knowledge that family was something you built, not just something you were born into, and that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. One evening, 25 years after that first stagecoach had brought the sisters to Montana, the entire family gathered for Eleanor and Caleb's silver anniversary. The party was enormous. The original family, the children and grandchildren, the extended network of women they'd helped over the years, neighbors, friends from town. William Sterling came finally, a dignified man in his 50s with his French wife and children. He and Eleanor shared a long conversation on the porch, putting to rest the last ghosts of the past. "Your father would be horrified to see this," William said, gesturing to the happy chaos of the party. "All these people, all this joy growing from what he tried to destroy." "The best revenge is a life well lived," Eleanor replied. "We've had our revenge 1,000 times over." As the evening progressed, toasts were made, stories were told, and the legend of the Dalton brides was polished into myth. But for Eleanor, standing surrounded by her family, the reality was better than any story. "Was it worth it?" Caleb asked, coming up beside her as the party swirled around them. All the fear, the lies, the danger. Eleanor looked at her sisters. Isabel still vibrant and laughing at 50. Rosalind serene and lovely, Jenny confident in a way she'd never been as a young woman. She looked at their children strong and free and unafraid. She looked at the life they'd built from nothing but determination and desperate hope. "Every moment," she said, "every terrifying, difficult, beautiful moment. Even the lies." "Especially the lies," Eleanor said with a smile. "They brought us truth. They brought us home." As the stars came out over Montana, the party continued late into the night. 4 brothers who'd sought wives through the mail, 4 sisters who'd lied to stay together, and the empire of love they'd built from that imperfect beginning. It was, everyone agreed, one hell of a story. And the best part was, it was true creative correspondence and all.